Welcome everyone to the Community Infrastructure Service Committee. We have a full slate today. So first up on the agenda, I would like to deal with the consent items, and just to make a note, we'll be dealing with consent item number 6, the 2014 traffic calming priority, under discussion item number 11, since they are related. And with that, do we have any questions on consent? You'll move, Councillor Galloway, we'll move all 1 to 5? See, so 1 to 5? Okay. We have any questions on any of the consent items by going what number, item number first? You know, anyone? Item number 2? 3? Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. Just looking at the policy, and maybe I just need to, looking for the staff person who's going to answer that. Oh, okay, Kathleen. Just looking at the policy, I find it quite restrictive in some of the areas. I'm just trying to find the pages that I had highlighted. On page 214, 215. Is this traditionally the way the policy has read in the past, or is this new changes to it? Because we didn't have an example, and often we have an example of what the policy was before and the changes that are happening. So what I'm looking at is on page 3-14, when it's talking about controls and prevention strategies. I'm not advocating for increased alcohol consumption, but is this seems to be highly restrictive. Sorry, it says the following controls and prevention strategies related to the types of available drinks shall be in place. So, event workers are encouraged patrons to consume food. How do you do that? The percentages of alcohol versus low alcohol beverages, the non-fortified drinks. I just really need to understand if that's typical or if it's how we're writing this policy.
Ms. Woodcock?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Fernandez. Similar language is already in the current policy. You're right, it may be difficult to, how do you force people to eat? The main goal is to make sure that there is food available during the hours that the bar is open, so that folks can have that there for them to encourage them to consume food, that type of thing. Okay.
Just wondering about the homemade alcohol. No, I'm only kidding. Please, media, don't write that in there. I'm glad, thank you for explaining that this is mainly the wording. So there's no significant changes in that area then?
No.
Okay.
No. It's different words for the same thing.
Okay, then that's fine. And I understand the rationale between the guest to event worker. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so can you help me understand what the main, I'm sure it's in the report, and I should have been clearer about how I was reading it. The main intention is just to update it because it hasn't been updated since 2008. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Fernandez, yes, it hasn't been updated since 2008 officially. It was in response to some changes in the Liquor License Act. So we had to change our MAP to reflect those changes.
Okay. And my other question is on the last page, 3-3. It talks about delaying effective date to provide a transition time for staff and the public while in-house training occurs. So who would be trained? If somebody took over an event and they were running it and there was alcohol being sold, it's their staff that have to be trained or our staff that have to be trained? And what are the implications of that?
Through the chair, it's simply to train folks and familiarize them with the new language in the policy. Okay. That's the type of training, as well as to give us time to get a new booklet printed up, that kind of thing, some implementation things.
Great. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Do we have any questions on item number 4? 5? Okay. We have no more questions. All those in favor of items 1 to 5? Oh, Councillor Gazzola? You have a question on item number 5?
I had a question on 6.
Question 6, I'm moving it till item 11. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we're going to move on to discussion item number 7, the storm management policy review. And a presentation will be given by Dave Miranda from Aquafar Beach, but I think Nick Olean's going to introduce the staff report. Go ahead, Nick.
Good afternoon, committee chair and members. In 1999, the City of Kitchener commenced a study to prepare a policy to assess the existing approach to stormwater management and create a citywide policy for the implementation of stormwater management. The final report and policy I-1135 were approved by Council in December of 2001. After the implementation of the Stormwater Utility and Credit Program in 2010 and 2012, staff were directed by Council to undertake a review of the existing policy and make recommendations to bring the policy up to date. Recommendations will assist in developing a policy that is consistent with the new stormwater utility model, ensures that cash and lieu practices are consistent with current initiatives under the credit program, and provides guidance for future audits, monitoring practices, and new initiatives. The review has been completed, and essentially stormwater management practices and relevant legislation has evolved significantly since the creation of the existing policy in 2001. Given the advancements in the industry, it's appropriate to initiate the development of a comprehensive stormwater master plan. And in order to replace the existing policy, a Schedule B municipal class assessment is required in order for the city to be in compliance with the Environmental Assessment Act. A comprehensive SWIM master plan will serve as a decision support tool, a methodology for the prioritization of works, a means to estimate future SWIM requirements and costs, and a transparent community process by which the city can establish stormwater management guidelines and policies for the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm pleased to present staff report INS 14037 as well as 031, which goes into more detail and has been endorsed by the Environmental Committee. These reports contain the results of the policy review and identify specific areas where the existing policy does not address current legislated requirements. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dave Maunder from Aquifer Beach to discuss the results and recommendations of the policy review and master plan process.
Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Got to pull these up a little bit. Okay, where do I point it? Plan B? What did you do with it? Did you press that?
I don't think I did it. It's not working.
There we go. Did you do that or did I do that? Sorry about that. Okay, again, I'd just like to take 10 minutes of your time to give you an overview of what the master plan would be about. So from the presentation will be from a context perspective, the rationale, sort of the objectives, the outcomes, and then the recommendation. So the one wordy slide I have is just going back in 2012. Kitchener staff received direction from Council basically to review policy I-1135 and report back to Council just to look at to see whether it's consistent with the new stormwater utility model you have, to ensure the cash and lieu practices are consistent with current initiatives, and provide guidance for future audits, of which Chris will present in a minute, the monitoring practices and the new initiatives. As a component of the 2013 audit, the SWIM policy and industry practices were reviewed, and you'll see some of those in a minute. As you'll see in a moment, there's quite a few practices since 2001, and we've also looked at the audit, as was mentioned previously. Just a simple slide, for lack of a better expression. Stormwater is not necessarily a stagnant field. As you look through that graph there, you can see that every year something new has been added, either by a province or through technology. A common consensus is that we probably have a half-life in stormwater of about 10 years, and then by that time, pretty well half of what you used to do has been improved, replaced, or upgraded. If you look at some of the traditional issues we have, I mean, we've been dealing with flooding and water quality. To a more recent sense, the whole concept of water balance, making sure water's getting into the ground, recreation, and aquatics have been looked at. The emerging issues, the public are getting far more involved. Locally, you have RAIN and REAP, green solutions that are looking at things. We have climate change, which I think is in the papers enough that I don't need to get into it in much detail. We have regs from the province and the Fed now on how to deal with habitat requirements and indeed fisheries acts and the like that we have to comprehend. The infrastructure age, and just if you look at the city as a whole, the older parts of the city, generally prior to 1980, 1985, pretty well have no stormwater management in place. So while the newer development at least has a stormwater pond, the older part is somewhat deficient in that manner. Some of the policies and regs I talked about, we have the Species at Risk Act that has come out, we have the Fisheries Act, we have the Clean Water Act, and Kitchener's been involved with neighboring municipalities for groundwater and source protection plans. So these are some of the key policies. Most notably for Kitchener, one of the few municipalities that has, since the bylaw, they have a stormwater charges policy. And by basic terms, the 2001 policy doesn't reflect the current direction, the financing options you have, nor the credit policy you have in place. So that's kind of the rationale for doing this. 2 slides here. I'll try and talk to them. We are actually now, as part of a large project for the Ministry of Environment, undertaking a series of how-to documents. And what this graph shows you is sort of the watershed. It's fairly representative for the Grand River. And what the Ministry of Environment trying to do is to balance infrastructure with sustainability. So as you can see, typically in the headwaters of a watershed, where you see the green part, it's pretty well rural for the most part. You get down to where Kitchener would be a representative yellow part in the middle, where you have your infrastructure and your ponds and the discharges. You may or may not have a water treatment facility drawing water from it. And then you work your way down. So what the province is trying to do is to look at how the different pieces of a watershed fit together. And whereas some of the approaches were done in the past of just looking at the assets, your pipes and your stormwater ponds, the province wants to see how that work impacts your streams. So you'll see that on the next slide. And what we're trying to show there, this is a simple concept drawing we put together and have been progressing through the ministry. It's a concept of asset management and sustainability. So I'm not sure if there's a pointer on this thing, and I don't want to do it. But basically, if you look at the lines you see on there within the yellow, they're your storm sewer system, and then you have your ponds shown in light blue. A lot of the old studies ended at that point. They just assumed that what went into the stream. Now we realize, we have the concept of fishable, swimmable, drinkable. Our streams have fish in them. Downstream people are drawing this water from it. So again, the future policy direction through master plans can and should be that you balance the environment with your asset management. Municipalities now have to make sure they have an asset management in place. They're likely by 2015 or 16 to have a sustainability plan in place to balance that out. And again, going ahead here and doing a plan in a progressive manner will ensure that that happens. Sort of the key slide here is why a master plan? I've said to staff several times, I think the city is in a unique position. It's one of, if not the only, where you have a defined policy for money. You have funding of approximately $13 million a year, but they don't have a current plan in place. So the current plan would really state what you should do, where you should do it, how you should do it, and essentially prioritize it. You've got money, let's spend it wisely. And that's probably the one point you have to bring home. Again, going back what you had 10 years ago doesn't meet current requirements. So basically, you need the master plan to guide future expenditures. It can be used as a decision support tool, prioritize work, and provide a transparent community process. It'll last for 10 or 15 years, and it'll follow the E8 process. The other key thing I should bring out here is that the process should follow and meet the requirements of a Schedule B, which means you can save money down the road, because whereas if you don't have a master plan, you have to start from square one. finish off phases 1 and 2. A properly defined master plan will meet the requirements of phases 1 and 2 of an EA process. So the purpose, again, I'll just talk to this in a general sense. You're balancing, as the third bullet point says, infrastructure issues such as flooding. You're also establishing environmental targets, and you're really trying to identify what are in your streams and what you need to do on the land to make sure that your streams are protected over the long term. So as I said, it forms part of the overall asset management plan. It'll have to be integrated with other studies. And again, it'll provide a long-range approach to identify opportunities and address issues before they become a problem. The objectives, just broadly based, as I mentioned on that longer slide, would cover quantity, quality, erosion control, natural heritage systems, and water sustainability. And basically, when you look at it near the end, as I mentioned previously, you do it as part of a master plan process. You'll have a strategic planning document that you can use for 10 or 15 years. It'll look at your infrastructure. It'll provide the policy update, including the stormwater audit, which Chris is going to talk about in a minute. And the bottom line is your deliverable is an implementation plan. What are the next steps? What are the projects you should do? Do they follow class schedule A, B, or C? What are the funding considerations? Where's the money coming from? The costs of doing the work. Operation and maintenance, as we've talked to staff, is a huge issue because it's one thing to have capital funds, but we also have to identify what's required from an operation and maintenance perspective and from a prioritization perspective. So the last slide is staff be directed to proceed with the development of a master plan under the Schedule B EA process to replace the 2001 management policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I do have a couple questions for you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a question of our delegate or our staff.
Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, did I read correctly that this master plan is going to cost us $500,000 to produce?
Mr. William?
Through the chair, that's our estimate at this time. So when we look at the cost for developing this master plan and the lifespan of the master plan, effectively that equates to roughly $30,000 a year over the 15-year lifespan, or 0.3% of the annual budget. So we're looking at a relatively small expenditure to direct where the majority of the revenue being generated by the utility is being spent to prioritize projects appropriately.
Yeah, I'm sure there were other examples you could have gotten to get the figures down smaller too, right? I'm still not convinced as to why we need to do this. You have plans for the next 10 to 15 years. We have budgets laid out. What for $500,000? What's the master plan going to tell us?
Through the chair, what we have laid out in our budgets for the stormwater utility are, we do have specific projects identified, but we also have annual programs identified. So things such as stormwater retrofit program or stream rehabilitation program. What the master plan will help us do is identify more sustainable solutions to rehabbing our infrastructure that we have in place. And as was presented through the asset management plan, we realized and recognized that we will be in a deficit position in most of our different assets at the end of the next 10 years, and we have to come up with strategic alternatives and solutions to improve our infrastructure in the meantime so that we're positioned to be able to eliminate that deficit in the long term.
But also technology and things are going to change drastically in the next 10 years. So maybe we won't be in a deficit.
Ms. Robinson, you have a
Just to add to that through you, Mr. Chair. So a master plan looks at the entire city as a whole and identifies priorities throughout the city. Yes, we have a 10-year capital plan, and staff has done the best they can with prioritizing the projects, but a master plan is going to look at the entire city as a whole, all our objectives, strategic goals, and make sure that we're identifying capital dollars in the most effective and efficient way possible. So I'm quite certain that the cost of the master plan will be recovered by optimizing our setting out of capital budgets.
Well, how will I know the fine results of the master plan? What will tell me what those? I mean, it's going to cost us. No matter how you say it fast, divided by how many times, but it's going to cost us $500,000. How do I know that we're getting our money's worth for that $500,000?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in my experience working with many municipalities across Ontario, when they have master plans for stormwater, sanitary, or water, decisions are made more effectively. Staff have better decision-making capability because it's laid out in an overarching document that helps us. We save staff time, and we're more effective. So my engineering experience is what I'm asking you to rely on.
Did you just say you're going to be able to cut staff?
I don't recall saying that, no.
It's okay. Thank you.
We have Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave, for coming in and doing the presentation. So I feel that my questions may cross over between your expertise and our staff's responsibility as well. So you're talking about, if you would mind going back a couple slides to some of the wording that you had written. A little bit further. It was the one that you said was the wordy.
Oh,
yeah, that.
That's near the
Sorry.
front.
I am certainly.
There you go.
Yeah, that one certainly. I think that there are some good recommendations here in terms of developing policies, but we are much further ahead than many municipalities, right, in terms of our stormwater policy and our credit program.
Through you, Chair, you're much farther ahead in thinking having monies available to carry out works. I would say you're similar to most other municipalities with respect to policy and actually how to implement it. Just to add, stormwater master plans are being done very commonly now. Most major municipalities, as was previously stated, are doing them to best and most wisely spend your money and to know basically the phrase of getting your biggest bang for the buck.
Okay, so recognizing that you of course are representing Aquifer Beach as the consultant who's done some of a lot of the work on our stormwater management ponds and what other municipalities have you been doing this kind of work for?
We're presently working or have finished about 10 and similar sized municipalities, Brampton, Mississauga, Toronto, Hamilton, as well as smaller municipalities throughout Ontario.
Okay. In doing the implementation or setting out the master plan, do you identify some of the I'm trying to think, not the risks, because that's going to be my next question, but some of the positives that are happening within a municipality and some of the deficits that are happening. Is that part of that master plan?
Yeah, again, sorry, through you, Chair. We would do that both from an infrastructure perspective and from an environmental perspective. For example, you look at the different streams, which ones are healthy, which ones need work done to them. From a flooding perspective, where parts of the city may have flooding and where your infrastructure is more than adequate. And again, I think as was mentioned previously, you don't really have that big picture now. You have it in pieces throughout the city. So that's the primary purpose of undertaking this study.
Okay. So once we have something like a master plan, would we be able to also identify the sources of contamination or the sources of, and I'm thinking about, new development specifically. Often the mitigation points aren't in place the way they should be, and so we see contamination of our streams and our waterways. is your hope to be able to identify those and sort of, and maybe not necessarily finger point, but at least hold accountable those sources of erosion and contamination to our streams and our water courses?
Through you, Chair, we'd certainly identify, again, on a stream-by-stream basis, where the situation is bad, good, or indifferent, and we'd identify whether it's generally equated to an industrial, commercial, or residential. But as importantly, you're going to identify the most cost-effective way to move forward and address that issue. And
Sorry, Mr. Golding, you care to add something?
Yes, through the chair, I also just want to point out a fundamental difference in where our policy was directing us to where we see a future master plan directing us, and that is our existing policy from 2001 really focuses on end-of-pipe controls. So that means conveying the water from various sites to some end-of-pipe infrastructure, such as a pond. Whereas where we see the industry going now is that there's a lot more at-source controls being encouraged, and you'll see this through the upcoming water management plan from the GRCA and source protection policies that are currently being reviewed by the province. And our goal is to align those objectives with our policy, and the credit program again is also encouraging more at-source controls.
Ms. Robinson.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would add to that no, the goal of the master plan will not be to look at specific subdivisions and find out whether they're meeting the objectives that were set for them. That's done through a different process, so the master plan will not cover that.
No, that wasn't my my suggestion. I guess my thought were there are various reasons and rationales why streams and water courses become contaminated. Some of course is very obvious. Oh, I'm 5 minutes, right? Okay.
You can finish off your question.
Sorry, now I've lost track. Very clear contamination sources, so industry and commercial runoff, but also often during development, there are opportunities for better mitigation that doesn't always happen and result in contamination of streams. So I'm hoping that if we're looking towards a master plan, that we'd be able to cover off all of those areas. Not post-development water quality is really important too, but we have to stop the possibility of contamination happening during grading and work in new development sites.
So certainly in broad strokes, a master plan will set general policy for new development, but on a specific new development, our development review process will pick up and ensure that we're establishing criteria that suit the particular sub-watershed study and the circumstances around that development. Okay,
I do have some more questions after. Thanks.
Councillor Singh?
Yes, thank you. So for the master plan, are we legislatively required to formulate a master plan for stormwater management? Or is that the direction that the province may be going? Because I've heard in the past that there are certain guidelines that may be coming down the pipeline. So,
through the chair, there is a current requirement to have an asset management plan in place to access provincial funding, and the direction that we're of the understanding is that in 2015 or 2016 that will be enhanced by the requirement for a sustainability plan, and the master plan will inform that and have that in place for us.
So currently we do have an asset management program, though, do we not? And does that asset management program also speak to our assets for stormwater management? So would they be congruent work that they both would be doing, or this would be entirely different? Because part of the master plan I'm hearing is setting priorities for these assets that we've already implemented.
Yes, through the chair, they would be congruent in the sense that our current asset management plan displays that we will be in a deficit position on various stormwater asset categories in the next 10 years, and we've acknowledged that we need to look at alternative technologies and solutions to help extend the lifespan of our existing infrastructure.
Okay. And Mr. Roberts, I respect that your answer that you gave for staff to rely on your expertise in recommending why the requirement of a master plan for stormwater management. But is the fact not there that at this point, this program being so early on of our stormwater management utility, where we finally have adequate funding to address the concerns that have been idle for a very long time, that the focus should not be to take care more of those immediate concerns before we start formulating a far-reaching policy where it'll only outline just additional shortfalls. And rather than efficiencies, just shows that we need more money than we already have right now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so two things. Firstly, I'll remind you that our asset management plans around stormwater, we have the least confidence compared to water, sewer, and roads. We have much less information on our stormwater systems than we do on the other systems, so we're not as confident. The fact that we have a stormwater utility that can fund stormwater works is not related to having a master plan. The master plan, again, is an overarching sort of policy document that helps us establish where we should be spending our money. So they're not, there's a relationship between the two, but they're not directly related.
So my question is that...
Sorry, okay.
My question was more of, through previous reports, staff has already outlined a serious deficiency towards a stormwater management program.
Yes.
So we've already prioritized through our capital forecast of projects that need to be done no matter what, because they were supposed to have happened a long time ago.
Yes.
So is this really necessary to bring forward a master plan so immediate right now? Isn't it still not advisable, as Councillor Gazzola kind of referred to, that we focus on the things that we've already prioritized that's in the capital forecast?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we've established a capital forecast based on the best information we have, the best information that staff can bring forward, but I still believe that a master plan sets out broad criteria across the city and will help us to establish those priorities.
Okay, last question. You said it would bring about efficiencies, which would assist in reducing costs. Could you speak to some of those?
Certainly. So when we review development plans for stormwater, if we had an overarching master plan that would establish for staff some standards and criteria that they need to follow, so we wouldn't be going back and forth with developers on different things that sometimes we do now, so we'd save some effort there. Certainly for the stormwater utility staff, we currently have significantly more staffing needs than we have staff to do the work. We have many projects we're trying to move forward and we don't actually have staff time to get it all done, or we're struggling. So if we can find efficiencies in terms of which projects we do and prioritize them, I believe that would help us from a staffing point of view. So not to reduce staff, but to let staff work on other projects.
So through this, it would limit the strain on our taxpayers or utility payers, where they would be required to pay more and more rapidly because of these efficiencies. So staff are confident that the strain wouldn't be broadened on requiring further increases to our utility fees.
I believe, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe our increases in the stormwater utility are established based on the asset management results, which say that we need to increase the funding by 3% per year, and then at the end of our 10-year period, we're still going to be in a deficit position. That doesn't change with a master plan. A master plan helps us make sure we're spending the right money, the right time, in the right location.
Thank you.
Just in time. Councillor Dan Gunn-Graham.
Thanks very much. And Dave, thanks for your patience on the witness stand there. I just have a couple of questions for you.
No problem.
Why 10 to 15 years for duration of the life cycle of a master plan?
That's through Mr. Chair. That's a general number. Typically, under an EA process, a plan should at least be considered for being updated every 10 or 15 years. You will, like any, I'm trying to be honest, like any plan, you can say it's a 30-year plan. We don't know development patterns. We don't know so many things. On a positive note, you want to provide a very concise way of these are the projects where you get your biggest bang for the buck for the next 10 or 15 years.
And the second question is about phases 1 and 2. You said that if we did the master plan, that this would be, really would count for phases 1 and 2. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll just give you a very simple, sorry again through Mr. Chair, a very simple example. We just finished the City of Mississauga master plan. We identified the key location for a stormwater pond to be retrofit. We do not have to do an EA for that pond. We went straight to detailed design, which our firm is doing now. So there is a cost allocation, but take any of your recent projects. If it's studies done properly, you don't necessarily have to do the EA component for those projects. You can lead directly into design.
So that might be an efficiency and cost savings then to the city.
It's definitely an efficiency and cost savings, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor Zaire.
Thank you. A lot of my questions have been asked, but just before I ask my other question, I just want to make a comment on a point of order or privilege. You know, we've talked about this before. based on some of the questions that were asked earlier, sarcasm is not a very respectful way to ask questions and make comments, and I'll just leave it at that. My questions relate to the cost factor and potentially where this will go in terms of the budget. So this is related to the outcome of the study. What changes might we see in the capital budget in the future? And is it a matter of changing the priorities? And I had written down earlier, so it's been partly answered, but I'll ask how I put it. Does it mean an increase in cost, a decrease in cost or budget, or does it mean you do more for the same thing, for the same value?
Mr. Golian?
Through the chair, I think what the master plan would strive to accomplish over its time of development, which we anticipate to be 18 months to a full 2 years, is it may potentially reallocate some existing budget dollars in a more efficient manner so that we can accomplish more with the same amount of dollars that we currently have.
That's it? Okay. Councillor Yaneski?
Since 2001, it's noted in the report that there's been a lot of legislation that's probably come down from the province, the federal government, the regional government, in terms of guidelines, policies, regulations that come along, I guess, with advancement of technology and more better data that's been collected. And as that has come down to our departments, I would gather that staff have gone ahead and implemented them and started following them and doing what needs to be done just to meet them. So what we're doing right now with the master plan, I would gather, is now taking all the stuff that has come down over the last several years and putting it into a nice little package. But we're already doing all that stuff in terms of subdivision design and any new stormwater management policy, stormwater management ponds that come in new subdivisions and outlying areas are already meeting these guidelines. In areas of the city that's already been developed pre-stormwater management design, those areas that are subject to redevelopment would follow site plan process, and any types of swim issues in terms of on-site storage, oil, I forget the phrase again, inceptors, whatever, yeah. I mean, those are all implemented to control the stormwater management. So is there going to be anything new that may come out of this report besides all the stuff that we're doing right now? I don't know, either one of you. I sort of aiming at both of you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start the process. Again, it goes back to previous questions. I mean, for example, now, the general way that you address pollution is through measures that people can do on private property, measures that people can, or the municipality can do within their own road right-of-ways, and then the traditional thing, which is putting an end of pipe ponds. Part of this strategy will address the most effective way to do that and how to do it and where to do it. So that's one thing. And the other thing you mentioned was related to new development. There are, for example, new standards that are out there that are probably going to come this way. But also, the last slide I showed, there's a core in the middle where there's very little from a stormwater management perspective. So the study can and should address the most effective way for older areas in the city to sort of get up to speed with the current standards and policies.
And that'd be the biggest challenge that I would see you would have, is the older developed part of the city. You're not just going to go and take a block of land and create a stormwater management pond downtown somewhere, because it just may not work, but you have to sort of figure out other ways of doing it. And will this provide the guide, or will you sort of, I don't know, help me out on this.
Yes, through you,
Anyone.
through you, Mr. Chair, it very much will provide a guide as to very specific type of projects or general programs that need to be implemented from a community basis in order to make the plan effective and efficient.
And through the chair, I'd just add that it falls back on a point I made previously, which was that our existing policy is really focused on end-of-pipe solutions, and we have no room to build end-of-pipe solutions in existing developed areas. So it goes back to what the credit program has really been trying to encourage in those existing areas, which is to retrofit properties and deal with rainfall at the source, so where it falls. And as part of the master plan, part of the scope of that will be to have a look at the credit program, the existing one, and see if there are opportunities to enhance it, to get better uptake in existing built-up areas, and to keep that initiative moving forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair Anitis. So I understand this correctly then. So assuming this is approved and ratified at council, the next time then we would probably see anything to do with this would be like a consultant selection, that sort of thing. Is that correct? Okay. Just a brief comment. I'm certainly more interested in meeting our legislative requirements on this sort of stuff than blazing new trails. So would it be possible to have for staff to return by Monday, or send an email, I suppose would be more appropriate, so I have a sense of where we are in comparison to other municipalities, of what other municipalities, I guess in Ontario perhaps, that have already implemented a stormwater master plan, and if possible, the costs of those.
Mr. Wilmer?
Through the chair, certainly we can do that. I just would remind council that, and I would be the first to agree, we don't always need to be the ones at the leading edge, but this is a community that drinks its groundwater. Most communities in Canada don't say that, but this is the largest urban area in Canada that relies primarily on groundwater for our drinking supply. So if there's any area in Canada that should be at the leading edge when it comes to stormwater management, it's the communities in Waterloo region.
Fair point. So could I get that information as well? Yes, thank you.
Okay. We don't have any further questions from the remaining members who wish to ask, because we're going to go for a second round here. We have Councillor Cazzola. You were keyed in here. Okay. So, okay, Councillor Fernandez.
My questions are of staff and not of Dave.
Okay.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. One of the things I noticed that there was a talk about setting targets. Who would be setting the targets? And that would be on 7-3, the study targets. Identifying through the study process a series of targets that can be used. So that would be the consultant, or that would be staff that would set the targets?
Through the chair, that would be both. Staff working with the consultants.
Okay. You commented that this was, it was brought to the Environmental Committee, and I apologize, I forget what your wording was. They didn't approve it. They reviewed it, correct?
Through the chair, endorsed it. We brought a recommendation, the same recommendation which is before you right now, to Environment Committee, and they endorsed that recommendation to be brought to this committee.
I apologize. I have the question, the report here. It said recommendation for information only. I don't remember them us seeing a recommendation at that meeting. An endorsement, but they did not see the recommendation. There was no recommendation at that meeting. So that my concern is that there's two different ways of thinking. I don't think the Environmental Committee had enough opportunity to review this, but I'm going to talk about that in my comments. There's a comment also about risks on page 7-4. Can we have a sense of what kind of risks we're talking about outside of what the obvious risks, of course, is the implications and the impacts on our groundwater, as Mr. Wilmer indicated to us. But what other risks would we be incurring if we didn't do a master plan?
Through the chair, the risk for us is that we would not be in a position to implement the types of controls that we see being required or being developed in other municipalities currently. So those at-source controls, the controls that are being recommended by the Grand River Conservation Authority Water Management Plan, and as well as working within the constraints of the source protection policies from the region of Waterloo.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I wrote it down correctly. So you're saying not in the position to do the source controls that the source protection act that GRCA is working on. Is that right?
The source protection policies are driven by the Clean Water Act, and that's being led by the region of Waterloo.
Okay.
And in the water management plan, which will be presented to committee in May, I believe, also identifies these at-source controls being recommended to be implemented.
Okay. On 711, there was in climate change number 9, it talks about non-consideration for the above. Can you help me understand what you meant by that? So it talks about the 2001 swim policy lacks specific policy requirements on and on Opportunities Act and Ontario Water Resources Act, which reference the need to adapt plan for climate change. Non-consideration for the above may leave the municipality vulnerable to legal action. Can you help me understand that?
Through the chair, there's a general understanding in the industry that the climate is changing. We're seeing different storm events than what we have historically seen, and we need to come up with strategies to adapt to that, and we have to face that head on, or risk being in a position that we could have acted, or we had the opportunity to have made a decision to do something and neglected to do so.
Okay, so you're suggesting the situation when we have a deluge of rain and we see things, stormwater backing up, that we could be putting ourselves at a risk for legal ramifications from residents and businesses. Is that what you're referring to?
Through the chair, that is potential, yes.
Potential. Okay, good. The EA you're talking about the study you're talking about taking 18 months to 2 years?
Correct.
Okay. So, because it will be a Schedule B, that would mean that there would be public opportunity for input.
Yes, through the chair, it is an opportunity for public input. It's also going to be considered a mid-level complexity EA, and given our new protocols, a member of council is invited to sit on the steering committee. And I should further point out that when we brought this to environmental committee, it was also a request that a member of environmental committee sit on the steering committee.
Right, and I think that was one of the things that I was going to mention, that environmental committee members sit on the steering committee. Okay, my time is up again, so I think that's all the questions I have right now, but I have comments.
Okay. Do we have anyone that's going to move the recommendation? Mayor Zaire? Okay. Your comments? Anyone have comments? Councillor Fernandez?
I see that being a strong advocate of water quality and water quantity and always being sort of that nagging person whenever there's development happening, that we make sure that we're putting in mitigation, appropriate mitigation, and then we watch, and I spoke briefly with Chris about Ward's Pond just before we convened our meeting. I met him out at Ward's Pond, and Chris and one of your other gentlemen were out there monitoring and taking a look at the creek and the pond. It is really crucially important that we affect what's happening to our creeks and our waterways, because we do take our drinking water. The only difficulty I have here is the cost, because I think it's very difficult to quantify that cost for a master plan. I apologize, I should have asked this question in question. Recently, we had a master plan that came to the city that staff had done completely in-house. Can anybody recollect what that was? And I know it wasn't development charges and it wasn't the official plan. It was the Leisure Fields. Thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. It was the Leisure Facilities Master Plan. I think that we've got some great expertise in staff, and I understand expertise that Aquifer Beach has had for years with us in doing our monitoring, and they're out in the field, they've got that expertise. But I really would like to see us move towards a partnership that would be cost effective, using the expertise of Aquifer Beach if they were the ones who tendered the project and we accepted that tendering. So I think there's got to be some kind of a balance, I mean, similar to the kind of balance we're looking at in protecting our waters and our streams and our drinking water. So I do support the recommendation. I just wonder if there's, and I wish I had thought about a way of amending it, but I really would like to see us work in a better partnership, still with the same kind of outcomes. Our engineering staff and our staff around our stormwater management ponds and the credit policy and all the policies that they've been working on for the last 5-6 years, they have laid the groundwork and have the expertise in that area, and I think that they can move forward on what they've seen, building on that, move forward on building a master plan with some input. So those are my comments. My last comment is regarding the Environmental Committee. When it was, when this report was brought forward, I did feel that there was not enough information, notwithstanding that at present our Environmental Committee is really low in numbers, and I fear that there wasn't enough opportunity for them to really digest the entire report. But I am glad to see that an Environmental Committee member can sit on the steering committee. I think that's crucially important. Thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Yes, I will support the recommendations on the principle of receiving some additional information as recommended by Councillor Davey, because I think we do have to take a reflective approach to see what other peer municipalities are doing as well. We have to take solace that we have taken tremendous strides in mitigating and improving our initiative towards stormwater management and protecting our source water. But that at the very fact, we have to still be mindful that it has to be at the affordability of our residents as well. I'll use a similar example to fire protection. It would be beneficial for our community to have a fire truck on every street, but we have to live within the means. And I think at this point, we have a strong priority set, and we have to look at mitigating those before a wider document. But still, I will support it, seeing what other peer municipalities are doing, and then I will make my decision on council.
Mayor Zerr, do you want to address your comments at the end? Okay. Councillor Etherington?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to quickly say that I don't think we can go cheap on protection of our water. We just can't have it both ways. When I listen to Councillor Fernandez, in order to protect our water, we've got to be prepared to pay the price. This plan is expensive, but it's, to me, as was said, it's a 15-year investment and well worth the price. I've seen, in my ward, I've seen some of the benefits of stormwater protection, and it has my support, although I'm willing to support Councillor Davey in his request for more information, but ultimately it certainly has my support.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock?
Yeah, just first I want to caution, I was the one who suggested it was the Leisure Facilities Master Plan. It was mostly done in-house, and it was only an update versus a first version. So I think it's a hard parallel to draw. I think this is going to require ample time and energy in order to complete the policy review and the proposed master plan. Just quickly, I think it's important work and it needs to be done. And I think with respect to the comments made about the Environmental Committee, they received a 15-plus page document, and I think that that's a lot of information. At least that's a lot of the information I was able to read and gather, and it really makes sense to move in this direction, get a place where we can start and then continue to move on and improve our services for the residents of Kitchener.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much. This is about being proactive and not reactive. So I appreciate that we're moving forward in a way that's trying to be responsible and certainly leaders. I think that it's appropriate for us to be leaders in the environment in terms of water and our quality of water. If there's an area to be leaders in, that's the one. So I'm comfortable with this as an investment. I hope it does last 15 years and not just 10. As Councillor Gazzola said, there's a lot of changes in technology, but I do hope that at least this visioning or forecast can lead us down that path, and this will be money well spent.
Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, I too am also prepared to support this. I think it's a move in the right direction. We've already been doing a lot of stuff that have been come down from over the years, and we have implemented through greenfield development with swim ponds and doing in site plan reviews that have been already adopting different measures to control it. The report itself will sort of bring into a nice package of direction and under a guideline for the whole city for the next number of years, very similar to what the Kitchener official plan does as well. Provides land use guidance in terms of development for the future for the city. This is an engineering perspective of guidance and direction for the next number of years in terms of stormwater management control and the efficiency of that particular system. So I think it's the right way to go.
Mayor Zaire.
Thank you. I will support the recommendation as I had moved, and it's about long-term planning. And there are, I think without doing this, there are potential risks. Some have, unfortunately, in other municipalities, have found out what those risks are. I don't want to be in that position, and this is about prevention. I had written down the same words that Councillor Glenn Graham talked about, that this is being proactive rather than reactive to what may or could happen within our community. And it is, it clearly is an environmental issue. And we talk great words around this, and not only here around this horseshoe, but out in the community, all of us, and the public as well, about giving, making sure that we are protecting our environment. And so I think this is putting our money where our mouth is. The issue of the groundwater cannot be underestimated. We need to make sure that that we protect that. We need to put plans in place for the long term. If we don't, I would suggest that if we do not have a master plan, the world won't come to an end tomorrow, but it may cause a significant problem in terms of those risks. And I would hate to say 10 years from now, and I won't be one of those people sitting around this horseshoe, that we wish we would have had a plan so that we wouldn't have wasted dollars doing some things that are not necessarily the critical things to do. So I think that this supports and protects our current investment in stormwater management facilities across this city, and I think that we need to do whatever we can to make sure that they are in place for the long term. I will be supporting it. I ask for a recorded vote.
I'm going to add in my comments, and I think this is an issue that either you're fully committed and that you need to dedicate the resources to implement such a strategy. And knowing what I know, dealing with certain issues in my ward in particular, I've dealt with some stormwater issues, and I understand greatly how the public relates to these stormwaters. They see them as an incredible add to the community, and they see this as part of paying their taxes. And given that the master plan really hasn't been really done since 2001, that we've implemented a stormwater utility and we've done a lot of work in the way of stormwater management, like there's new practices. We need to have a plan. We need to develop that. Like, and it doesn't. The whole plan that we are working with doesn't incorporate flood, erosion control, groundwater, surface water quality management, and other regulations that have been implemented over the last 15 years. And we need to get up to speed on that. And if we want to continue to be the forward-thinking community that we are with our environment, which is one of Environic's key factors that the public expects, we need to do this. And with that, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Oh, a recorded vote has been called. It's been voted unanimously, so we can all stand. We don't need to stand up. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the 2013 Stormwater Management Monitoring Results, and we have Nick Golian is going to introduce the staff report. Go ahead, Nick.
Committee chair and members, I'm going to keep my comments brief on this, but as part of the existing stormwater policy, an annual monitoring program is to be completed each year. The staff report summarizes the monitoring program and practices carried out to date in each of the categories included in the plan. There's a steering committee made up of the city, the GRCA, the Region of Waterloo, and the consultant that conduct this audit and monitoring program on an annual basis. I'm going to let Chris Denick speak to the recommendations, except for one, which is installing signs at stormwater management facilities. This has been a recommendation for a number of years, but the main driver for this is that we've done a lot of asset management work, and we've identified each of our stormwater facilities now with a unique identifier, and we're collecting attribute information about our stormwater facilities. So this will allow us to actually sign the facility with the identifying number of that facility, so that when public identifies an issue out there and calls into our corporate contact center, they can, rather than try to guess which street is the closest intersection, they can say exactly where they are, and that'll help make our follow-up maintenance more efficient, as well as it'll identify what are permitted and unpermitted uses at these facilities and which bylaws pertain to that in order to be able to enforce them. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Chris Denick from Aquifer Beach to discuss the 2013 water quality monitoring results.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. For the presentation, I'm going to give you some of the background. Obviously, the monitoring program itself, summary of results, highlight the areas of good performance, areas in need of improvement, some of the key findings, and finally the recommendations. The background, of course, is the 2013 program. This past year's program was for 6 sites. It included water quality monitoring, and if you recall, the previous year's recommendation recommended the implementation of a flow proportionate monitoring of one station be undertaken as part of the 2013 program to develop an event mean concentration, or an EMC, for that site. So this year's monitoring program included 1 EMC site as well as grab sampling, full biological monitoring for the 6 sites, that's benthic macroinvertebrates and fisheries. Physical monitoring was undertaken for flow and temperature at 2 key locations. And then as well, annual monitoring was conducted to prioritize the works as the intended rationale behind the 2013 program and every program for the audit. And as well, where we had multiple years of data, trends were identified within the system as well. And I'll touch on those later. To give you a sense, just to orient yourself, this year's program, again, the 6 sites, we had KD1, or this is Kolb Creek or Kolb Drain. This is a location was at Otterbein and Misty Street, and this was flow and temperature monitoring at this particular location. MG1, which is Montgomery, which is at Shelley Drive within Wilson Park. We have Sandrock 2 or SR2, Queens Boulevard and West Heights Drive. Idlewood 1. This is Edgewater and Janine Street. This is at the end of Lackner, within the new development area. And we have SB2 or Strasbourg 2, same site as last year. This is Mara Meadow Drive and Bean Drive is the intersection. And this is downstream of the Wards and Brigadoon rehabilitation site. And finally, the one EMC site for 2013, or the automated site. This is a picture of the automated sampler that was purchased by the city as part of this program and will be moved from site to site. This is at SB 13A, or Strasbourg Road and Battler Drive, and this is downstream of the existing stormwater facility, Pond 61. Additional sites were monitored by Stantec as part of Victoria Lake and were integrated. There's also Westmount Drain was monitored, and then the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Station at Old Mill Road, and finally Blair Creek was monitored by GRCA, and all this is contained within the audit report as well. So these are the additional sites in blue that I just mentioned. In terms of the monitoring, to give you just, again, a quick overview, 2013 program was 5 wet, greater than 10 millimeters, 1 melt or winter event, and 5 dry samples were taken at each location. The event mean site, or the automated site, was 8 wet events. 4 were completed in 2013, with the remaining 4 underway this spring, so that we get the full year to develop the EMC across all seasons. And as well as part of the program, 33 stormwater ponds were monitored for chlorides as part of regional initiatives that the city is undertaking. Fall 2013 and the spring 2014 samples have been collected. And the same constituents as previous years were sampled at all locations per the standard protocols. From biological monitoring, we did do benthic and vertebrate community sampling, as well as fish community sampling at the 6 locations. And then the physical monitoring, continuous flow and temperature at Kolb and Strasbourg Creek. In terms of summary of results, some good performers. Strasbourg 2, so SB2, the presence of brook trout as well as the benthic results indicate that this is good quality and good water quality, as well as a habitat is at this location. Idlewood 1 was a fair performer, but is showing positive signs at the particular location. And Blair Creek is in all, or in general, if I may, is one of the better performers within the city. All of these sites generally correspond with more naturalized catchment areas or water courses, and we see the improvements as well as the water quality benefits of that type of characterization of the land use. In terms of the poor performers, Montgomery 1, no change from previous years. It was a poor performer in 2012. It is again. And then Sandrock 2, again, has improved since 2012, but again is still a poor performer. And these sites correspond generally with densely developed catchment areas and channelized water courses, some of our more urban areas of the city. Chloride monitoring, again, the 33 ponds were monitored. The map to the right is in the report, and you'll see all the pond indicators that were sampled in the fall and spring of 2014. And these are some of the fall results. We just collected the spring, and that's being analyzed currently. And what you see is this is the essentially the aquatic limits that we'd like to see from long-term exposure at about 120 milligrams per liter up to 250 milligrams per liter for aquatic light. So generalized target is there for long-term exposure. From a fall monitoring, you'll see it's split into 2. Areas of new development are generally below the CCME guidelines, and area of older development are above the CCME guidelines. And this gives some indication of the type of chloride contamination in some of these older areas that are impacting these stormwater ponds. And what you see there is inlet and outlet concentrations within the stormwater facilities themselves. In terms of the fish community, Strasbourg 2, we did see an increase trend within the brook trout community. So we have an increasing trend from 4 in 2013, 2 in 2012, and 1 in 2011. So we are seeing that increase. It is the highest number of species captured. We're at that location. So we do see a very good species diversity across that site. And what we are seeing is a continual increase, which is supporting the assumption that at that particular sampling location, the brook trout are traveling upstream. As part of the wards and Brigadoon monitoring, we have 42 adults and juveniles were captured in August and 59 in October of this season in 2013. So we are seeing an improvement, and as I said, the migratory pathway is being captured by that increase in the downstream channel over the years. In terms of historical trends, this is for sites where we have 8 years of data or more that we can look at. We do see an increase in chlorides at both Kolb Drain and HS1, which is upstream of Victoria Lake. Nitrates, Montgomery 1 since 2005 has been decreasing, as well as within Kolb Drain. Dissolved phosphorus, we see an increase at Kolb and Montgomery, and this has continued since 2002. And zinc, again this year, HS1, we are seeing an exponential increase since 2005 of zinc concentrations at that location. So these are all areas that the increases are an indication that further work is needed. Some key findings, as I said, stormwater improvements are still needed within the city. Strasbourg 2 in general continues to be a good performer, and we are seeing improved fisheries within that area. Montgomery 1 and Sandrock 2, again, continue to be poor performers within the city, as evident from the results. And the zinc increases upstream of Victoria Lake. These may require further investigation based on the increases that we are seeing. Some recommendations for the 2013 report are to establish 2 flow proportionate monitoring sites in 2014. So the existing site will be moved and an additional site added. The collection, so we continue to collect water quality grab samples at the 4 remaining sites. And the intent, as I said last year, would be to move the EMC sites across the city to generate one set of data for the city. Monitoring of Balzer and Hidden Valley Creek, which ties into concurrent studies, is being undertaken in 2014. And also total suspended solids sampling at existing swim ponds to assess removal capacities is being recommended for 2014. So in general, this is the implementation table here, and you'll see the 2 EMC sites indicated as well as grab sampling. So EMC sites will be Kolb Drain and Montgomery 1, grab samples at Strasbourg 2, Sandrock 2, Idlewood 1, and Shoemaker 1, and dry weather sampling only at the past EMC site at Strasbourg 13A. And we'll continue the next steps in terms of chloride monitoring as part of the region's source protection policy. It's recommended as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Denick. We have one question for you, Councillor Fernandez.
One questionnaire, but lots of questions.
one individual for you so far.
Just going sort of to your next to last slide, the increases in phosphorus and zinc, can you speculate on why and where that's happening? I know where it's happening, but what the rationale is or why it's happening?
Both are very common contaminants in our urban environment. Zinc itself is in many metal treatments. It can be, again, so galvanization is a common area of zinc, brake dust, etc. This is from urban areas, can also be transported downstream from sediment loads. Phosphorus itself can be associated with agricultural practices, disturbance in soils, can also be from fertilizer use, can be from pet waste. So we do have some other sources that could be contributing to them. Again, these are indications that future work or investigation may be needed.
Well, you just led right into my next question when you talked about pet waste. You were out recently at the one monitoring station, and I guess maybe it's not only a question, but it's a comment, and certainly I'm hoping that the media will pick this up, because your comment about that agricultural practices, but also animal waste, can have an impact on the quality of our streams. And I asked you if you were able to make it through the landmines to access the ponds and the stream. And it's so crucial for the public to be aware that you may think it's okay for your dog to deposit its feces in our natural areas, but we've just heard that is a contaminant to that water, and that water eventually leads to our aquifers, which is what we draw our drinking water from. There's my soapbox stand. On to the next question. You talked about our stormwater ponds in terms of community. Can you go back a couple of slides, because I think that I may be jumping ahead of myself. The different kinds of communities that coexist. So we're talking about benthics, thank you, and fish. So are there other wildlife components or other ecological communities that we want to encourage to live in our streams and our stormwater ponds, and ones that we want to discourage, and how can the community help?
Yeah. through the chair. The benthics themselves are generally monitored because they are a long-term inhabitant of the substrate. So they're an indicator of both rapid change in the health of watercourse, but also long-term trends. That's why we monitor the benthics. And some of the results you'll see in the report identifies the number of individual species. That gives you a sense certain species are more tolerant of conditions, some are intolerant. And that gives you a sense of their water quality. In terms of fisheries, we're really trying to match up the classification of the watercourse with the fisheries themselves or historical presence of those fisheries in those areas as a part of a restoration measure. In terms of what the community can do, it's really a question of better management of the resource and not releasing invasive species into the natural environment. And that's something that all municipalities are struggling with.
Okay, and an example of an invasive species would be goldfish, right?
Yes, through you, Chair, goldfish would be invasive species.
Okay, and I did write about that because we met and I talked about that to you and your cohort about how important it is to get that message out to people. The other last question I had was regarding public consultation. So you did bring this to the Environmental Committee. Is there a way that we can do, maybe not public consultation so much as public engagement and public education around the quality of these streams and these stormwater ponds, from your expert opinion?
Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
First.
Through the chair, I would just start by saying that we do every 5 years we do a report card, which gives a high-level overview of the health and condition of our watercourses, and I think we're due for one in 2015 or 2016.
Okay,
Ms. Robinson would like to.
Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would add that as we're doing the Stormwater Master Plan, we will be doing public consultation, so that's an opportunity to throw up a few extra boards and make sure the public are aware of these things at no additional cost.
Okay, I think it's really, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important that we share some of the educational components. Your comment, Chris, about brake dust being a contaminant in our streams. People probably are not even aware of those kind of things. I realize some of them are out of their hands. I'll leave it. Is there another question? Another questioner?
You can come back after Councillor Etherington.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, this could possibly be answered by Nick or by Barbara. So when you find levels of zinc in the water coming into Victoria Lake, what do you do about it? Like it suggests here it could merit further investigation. What does that mean? Like maybe we'll look at it or we won't look at it?
Ms. Robinson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, practically speaking, zinc comes off of cars, and people drive cars, and so we need to think about this a little bit more. But practically speaking, I'm not sure. I would encourage everybody to ride their bicycle, but that is not necessarily going to happen. So it's something we'll look at, but some of these things in an urban environment we're not going to be able to control.
So you mean with all the money we give you, you can't eliminate cars?
If I had a magic wand, I would, and I ride my bike, so.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez, go ahead.
Okay. We are on number 8, item number 8, are we not? I'm just realizing that some of my questions may actually...
Discussion item number 3. Do I have it on here? Sorry. It's item 8, yes.
Okay,
correct.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that my line of questioning was following with the report. I guess really the only other question I had was related to the cash in lieu fee, but I don't think that's really a question for you, Chris. That's more of a question for staff. Are we able to gain as much cash in lieu on redevelopment sites as we need to make sure that any of our inner city streams, and we saw the two that are really poor performers that really need remediation?
Through the chair, yeah, we did a study in 2009 to determine what the appropriate level of cash in lieu would be, given land costs as well as construction costs. And we've been moving to increase the cash in lieu fee annually to get as close to that as possible. One component of the master plan will be to take a hard look at cash in lieu and determine whether it's actually encouraging the type of stormwater mitigation that we want to have take place. So For example, this has to be looked at in more detail, but if a property does pay cash in lieu of putting in stormwater quality controls, then they are not putting in stormwater quality controls, and we are looking at a downstream communal infrastructure to address the runoff from that property. So we need to do some cost-benefit analysis around that to determine what the most appropriate path forward in the long term is.
Okay, and I do have another question for Chris. You were talking about our increased brook trout in some of those locations. Was that surprising, considering the warms, like the heat of the summer? Some of Strasburg Creek are a lot more exposed than they used to be, but the temperature was still in the proper range for the trout to habitat and to breed.
Through the chair, that particular stretch, particularly upstream pond, has a very significant groundwater input. That is the biggest factor in terms of mitigating in-stream temperatures. The presence of the increasing number of brook trout in that area, as well as using the downstream channel now that the fish barriers have been removed, is not terribly surprising. It was one of the design objectives, was to connect those areas, and in fact we're seeing the benefits of that work through this monitoring.
One last question. If you're monitoring in your neighborhood, if you're walking along streams like Idlewood Creek or Strasburg or any of the creeks, and you see a significant change in the water quality, in other words, with an anticipated rainfall, a real muddying of the creek, is that generally something to be concerned about? Because I get a lot of calls from people who live adjacent to Strasburg Creek, and I confess to be one of them, from previous historical comments and work with MOE, that can be a sign of some kind of seepage or mitigation measure that may have failed.
Through the chair.
Sorry, did that come out very clear? Sorry, Chris.
I'll see if I can potentially answer that. There is a natural sediment load within a water course. So when it does rain, you will see some discoloration within that water. We are generally, if you're talking about a release from, a control, an upstream erosion control or sediment control, generally those are fairly noticeable and will leave traces behind on the banks or deposits in the bed of the feature itself. Are they always a case to be concerned? No, not always. Again, it's knowing your water course and knowing what's natural for that water course.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your answers and your time.
Thank you.
That's all we have. Thank you. Is anyone prepared to move the recommendation? Councillor Fernandez. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item on the agenda is the 3-hour parking bylaw pilot project. We have Shane Turner to introduce the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. The report's in front of you, and it refers back to a pilot project that was implemented by Council in May of last year. And the pilot project called on staff to suspend overnight enforcement of the 3-hour parking limit from May to, typically it would be April, but last year it was May to the end of November. So this is a follow-up report, and the report in front of you speaks about the impact on the community as well as the financial implications. In terms of the impact, what we saw was a decrease in 3-hour parking complaints in 2013, 741 compared to 938 the year before, so approximately 200 complaints, decrease in complaints, I should say. Staff attempted to address any of the complaints regarding 3-hour limits as best as possible during the day shift and the evening shift as a way to mitigate the concerns that were expressed with regard to not being able to enforce overnight. For the most part, the feedback was positive. I will say that the feedback was somewhat limited, but the feedback was more positive than negative in terms of people being able to park overnight versus those that wanted enforcement done. And again, we were able to mitigate the concerns around enforcement somewhat by being able to address the issues in the evenings as much as possible. In terms of the financial implications, we had a reduction in tickets And based on that reduction in tickets over the previous year, the financial impact was approximately $35,000, which is approximately 30% less than what we first anticipated when we wrote the report in April of last year. So going forward, based on the feedback from the community, staff are recommending that we continue with the program of not enforcing the 3-hour limit overnight. And what we mean by that is overnight is defined for the purposes of this program from 11 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. Two other items that were referred to in the previous report, and as part of those recommendations was a pilot project to allow for boulevard parking in Ward 5. That program was in place from December 1st until March 31st. So council will be reporting, staff will be reporting back to council on the impact of that boulevard pilot project in the coming months, obviously prior to December 1st. The other piece of it, there was a brief mention in the previous report and a recommendation that related to investigating an online parking exemption process. That investigation is built into the e-services component of the customer service strategy that's currently underway. What we found was that, what we found was a number of requests for parking exemptions was significantly lower than in previous years due to the fact that an exemption wasn't necessary overnight. Most of the exemptions that we received in 2013 during that 8-month period related to people that needed to park during the day because of driveway construction and maintenance and that sort of stuff. So again, to wrap up, staff are recommending that we continue with the program of allowing for parking overnight by simply suspending enforcement between 11 and 6 a.m. I'm available for questions.
Thanks, Mr. Turner. We do have some questions for you. Councillor Kelly Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I have two questions, and then I'd be prepared to move the recommendation at the appropriate time. My first question is, you touched on it, and I know we're not talking about it today, but you touched upon it briefly with regards to the boulevard parking. Do you anticipate, you said before December 31st, can I push you a little and suggest that maybe before the end of summer, or is that pushing it too much in order to get a report?
Certainly, I just referred to December 1st, just knowing that we have to have council's direction before that, but we'll talk with transportation planning staff and we'll come back as soon as possible. If we can, we'll come back before the summer break.
Okay. Thank you. And my second question is the goal of our bylaws to make money, or is it to put rules in place to manage behavior?
I'll take the second part of your question in terms of managing behavior. To go a little further, to really say that I believe the role of bylaw enforcement is to, council may have heard me say this before, to support healthy communities by achieving a level of compliance. Enforcement is one way to comply, or to achieve compliance, and education is the other piece of it. So certainly in terms of enforcing bylaws to make money, that's certainly not our direction.
Okay, that's all my questions, and as I said, I'd prepare to move the recommendation and have comments at the appropriate time.
Okay, it's noted. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. And I kind of had a similar question as to, I know you have outlined the shortfall or the deficit to bylaw with the lack of ticketing because of the blanket exemption. But again, the question is that the endeavor that the city is taking to allow a blanket exemption? And is that what our residents really want? So through the feedback that we've heard, you're saying that most of it has been positive.
That's correct. No, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I was carrying on with that. What tools of engagement do we use other than just taking in calls, which is normal practice?
Well, engaging the community impact was primarily based on the feedback that our staff would get when people were calling and asking questions about it. First of all, when we did a public awareness campaign in May, so that feedback was gathered by staff. In the early part, again, the feedback was positive. Throughout the year, when people called in to raise a concern about parking on their street, when we expressed to them that we'd be able to deal with it in the evenings, but not overnight, there was some level of frustration. but I would say overall it was relatively low. So it was primarily based on staff's interactions with public as they called in. We did not have any specific focus group. Councillor Singh, if that is more to your point.
Okay, all right. And as part of the, you've mentioned in the report that we'll be looking into incorporating this into our e-service component about, asking for exemptions. So in the report it said that it's already received council endorsement. Were you referring to council endorsement for the community engagement or customer service strategy, or the e-services having the ability for exemption for on-street parking?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the reference that I make in the report with regard to previous council approval was about the customer service strategy in general.
Okay.
Council had endorsed that, and we're building the exemption process into the e-service part of it.
Mr. May, care to address that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to add from a customer service perspective, I should caution council that any type of system that Mr. Turner's been talking about is going to take some time. Until we have a well-functioning CRM in place, it likely will not happen. Having said that, staff continue to work on Pink Street, and there are a number of parking-related options to Pink Street, but not in terms of these kinds of waivers.
Okay, that's helpful, because that was, if you can stay on, Mr. May, that was going to be my next question as well, as to when that customer service strategy would be fully matured. So most likely it's not going to be end of this year then. Is there a timeline that you can refer to?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we have identified a partnership with the region on their CRM as the preferred alternative. We have to have a decision by council by December 30th of this year, which means rollout won't happen until next year. Once we know what CRM tool we're working with, we can start to look at these specific applications.
Okay, all right. Because I was going to tie in any recommendation or the current recommendation that we have to incorporate that. It only be until, of course, the e-services component is a part of our customer service strategy. But if that's not going to be until next year, this is my comments, I would be supportive of this recommendation.
Councillor Dan Graham.
Thanks very much, Mr. Turner. Just a point of order, are we dealing with both recommendations at the same time, boulevard parking as well? Or we're just dealing with the 3-hour parking?
No, we're just dealing with traffic calming pilot
project. So I just wanted to ask, and I guess this has been addressed, that this relates to the whole city, first of all, and that in terms of the, I guess the application of it, that there's no other financial implications other than the reduction of parking revenues.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct, yes.
And would staff be able to spend time on other things if they weren't doing this? For instance, if they're not doing this enforcement overnight, the same staff are patrolling, can they be reassigned to different things?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we did when council directed us to, when council passed their direction in May, what we did was we diverted the officer that was working overnight to the afternoon shift to deal with parking complaints during the afternoons, and I do believe that by doing so we were able to mitigate some of the concerns from people that wanted some enforcement, just not quite on the overnight shift, but by diverting that to the evenings we were able to address their concerns significantly, but I can't say 100%.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So my understanding is that through speaking to your administrative staff, what you found out that there were less concerns being expressed. That would less concerns also equal fewer complaints equal less frustration? Did you get a sense of that?
To you, Mr. Chairman, I think overall there was less frustration, and I say that because I believe that there was less frustration on the part of the people that were looking for parking options. So again, some people were frustrated that we weren't able to address their issue overnight, but I believe it was outweighed by those people that were appreciative of the fact that they did have a parking option, whether it was a longer term parking option with a a child coming home from university, perhaps, is one example, or even just a short-term situation where somebody would be on vacation for a week or have relatives coming in for a week or a weekend. So I do believe overall there was less frustration, but again, the bulk of that would have been with less frustration on not having the parking options.
Right, okay. So we earned less money, but did that also, like I said, we had 2,630 tickets over the same time frame in 2012. How many of those do we find go unpaid? Do we ever have an understanding of what that, or even canceled? Because, you know, I've heard a number of times, well, you know, my son came home for the weekend, had a bunch of friends over, and, you know, they parked on the street and now they have a ticket. So I know that oftentimes we will say, oh, yes, you were unaware of that, or you're new to the city. There have been times where we've canceled some tickets in situations like that. Do we ever sort of take an understanding of how many of those situations we run into?
We have the ability to do that. It's not a report that I have that I can speak to today, but I can tell you that with any type of category of ticket violations, we usually estimate that there's going to be a certain number of tickets that won't be paid for various reasons, or won't be paid within the year that they're issued. That's the other important thing to understand is in some cases, some of these tickets we're not collecting the fine revenue for upwards of a year or perhaps 2 years. If somebody doesn't pay their ticket, it goes to what we call plate denial at the MTO office, and you renew your sticker eventually, and we'll get our money. So the province is constantly collecting money for us. But from a percentage standpoint, I would say that at any given time when we're estimating what the collection rate would be for tickets as a whole or any particular type of violation, we usually estimate it at between 80 and 90%, depending on the violation. So anywhere from 10 to 20% of those tickets either get canceled at court. They may get there may be discretion given by the officers due to circumstances, or the payment could be delayed for anywhere from 1 to 2 years.
Okay. And my other question is, did you find that there were areas of concern, so that we know the Conestoga College area is always a concern, but also new infill sites where there isn't sufficient parking built into that infill site? Are we seeing, if we eliminate this 3-hour parking, I'm afraid we're going to see some areas of concern, and how will we deal with that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, actually we don't, based on the feedback of our officers as well as our administrative staff, I can't think of any particular pocket or even small area of the city that had a chronic problem. That's not to say that it can't happen, but I can't think of any at this particular time. If we had a situation where we had to address something, we do have some options. One option is that we could try to deal with it in the in hours other than overnight. We could also do it by looking at whether or not there's any other violations we could apply, depending on the time of the day, or if they're blocking driveways or whatever. So there's other tools available. The third option is that if there became a chronic problem in an area, we could come back to council. We're at this particular point, we're not suggesting that we amend the bylaw. It's just what we're recommending in the report as a direction to staff. Gives us the ability to come back and revisit the issue if we have to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I had trouble understanding part of your reports. I just want to go over a couple of things. What is a parking tag? How much does a parking tag cost roughly? Is that a $20 bill?
It's $20.
Yeah, I was trying on page 9.3 of the report at the bottom. I was trying to understand what you were saying there, and I could see that the tickets went down from 2630 to what? They came down by. Anyhow, and it ended up costing you $35,000, right?
Yeah. Another way of saying the same thing is it was just a loss of fine revenue of $35,000.
Okay, and then and that was for 7 months, we're going to 8 months, so you're saying it's going to be 40,000.
Extrapolated over an 8-month period is potentially 40,000.
Okay. And yet you go on to say that when you wrote about it last year, you expected it was going to cost you 50,000. Right? Is that?
Yes. When we wrote the report, we estimated 50,000. We found that it was approximately 35 that we actually experienced.
Yeah. Somewhere I found in last year's report the figure of 75,000. But
and through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could, the reference to 75,000 would have been the potential total revenue impact of the 3-hour limit and the boulevard parking. So it was, I believe it was 50 and 25 is what I believe it was in the draft or in the report.
Okay, so now going further, you go on to say we had a deficit last year of 195,000. We know that 35,000 was from this problem.
That's correct.
Okay. What I was wondering, when we redid the budget or went over the budget this year, how was that changed? How much of the 194,000 was there?
I have some information. If you just indulge with me for one moment. So what happened? Again, the actual deficit for 2013 was, I'm going to ballpark it at 195,000. 35,000 of that was attributed to the impact of the pilot project. There was also certain funding that was provided at 2 stages in the budget process, which brought that deficit down for 2014, and that was approximately 110,000. And then we also, in looking at the deficit mitigation, we also estimated that approximately $30,000 in increased fine revenue from the 2 officers that were approved as part of the budget process. All those things combined would bring our deficit down, assuming that 2013 and 2014 are relatively identical in terms of a ticket activity, it would bring our deficit down to about the $20,000 range.
So what is, when you go on to page 9, what is the 40,000? What does that refer to? You say if this report recommendations are approved, the deficit would be further increased by 40,000. So
that 40,000 would be the impact of council's decision to not enforce the 3-hour limit. So right now, what we're saying is that with all the deficit mitigation in play, and again, making the assumption that 2014 would be similar in activity to 2013, it leaves us with a deficit of 20 at face value, and then potentially another 40,000 depending on the decision of council.
Okay, so if council goes along with this, and even after you've been given additional funds for this year, you're saying you'd end up the year 60,000 in the hole. Is that what you're saying?
If the 2 years' activities are the same, yes. That's our forecast at this particular point. Okay. Obviously, we'll have an opportunity to revisit those throughout the year.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. I just want to understand that. Just one other. All of these fines, all of these tickets are issued from other people complaining, right? That you don't go out and hand any out on your own.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, for the 3-hour limit, that's correct. The 3-hour limit is only done on a complaint basis. There's other types of parking enforcement that we do proactively, like overnight parking, snow events, that sort of stuff. But the 3-hour limit is strictly on a complaint basis.
Okay, so if there's a decrease, it's less people are complaining. Right. And I guess that's what you're drawing to here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to correct Mr. Ventros, the parking supervisor, reminded me that the parking ticket is actually $25, not $20. So my apologies for that.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have further questions, Councillor Gazzola?
I had. No. I just wanted to make so when we go now from 11 to 6, when you look at 3 hours, we're really going from 8 at night to 9 in the morning, right? Because you're not going to go out. You're not going to go out after 8 o'clock. And That's
correct. Well, essentially, yes, Councillor Gazzola, you're right. there's no enforcement between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., but the actual enforcement for the 3-hour limit has to, if we're going to issue any tickets based on a complaint, we'd have to do it before 11 o'clock. So, and then you back up 3 hours from there. So we're essentially saying that anytime after 7 o'clock at night, it's difficult for us to chalk new vehicles. It's the term we use to mark the 3-hour limit. But people still could get tickets up until just before 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Then we wouldn't start enforcement again until after 6 a.m. So really, we are talking about a larger period than the 7 hours of 11 to 6.
Okay, just one final question. Actually, the person doesn't earn the ticket until you go. Just when somebody complains, that's not enough. You go out and tag the car, right?
Yes. What we do, we actually do 2 visits. We record all the vehicles at a certain time. And in the evening, which again would be at the most 7 to 8 o'clock at night, and then we would come back 3 hours later, and the remaining vehicles that were there that we can prove were still there, we would issue tickets to.
So you legitimately know. So does that cover the cost? 2 trips plus vehicle cost. Does that cover the $20 or $25 ticket cost?
Perhaps not on a one-on-one basis, but when you realize that in many cases when the officer is going to to respond to a complaint, there may be multiple tickets issued at any given time. So on balance, the fine revenue that we do collect does represent a significant cost recovery. Now, having said that, of course, it is the cost of doing business to do what's right for the community.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I would just like to bring forward the recommendation and make a few comments if I can, if that was the appropriate time.
You may.
So obviously I'm moving the recommendation, and I just want everyone to know that I've written twice about this in my article to solicit feedback from the community, and as we know, that could come from anybody in the community, and really I've heard nothing from anybody, and that includes boulevard parking. I did hear from people, and I know we're not talking about boulevard parking today, but I did hear about some concerns from residents early on about that. But so far, nothing has, once the education program came forward, there really didn't seem to be many problems with that in Ward 5 throughout the winter months. I think that what's going on right now is we're taking the right approach for the time being. As Mr. Turner's outlined, this is the right solution in order for us to ever revert back if we want and not go forward with a full-on bylaw amendment. It's also great to hear about the e-services component, that it's being looked at, understanding that it may be a few years out still, but at least it may give us another avenue down the road. I asked my question specifically about the money because I believe that our tickets aren't about making money, but it's about managing behavior. And I think it's important that we look at it from a perspective of supporting the community and the community's needs and doing what's right. And I know Mr. Turner actually just said that, and it's funny because I had written that exactly down. It's about what's doing right for the community. So I think this is the right approach to take at this time, but also gives us an easy out if we ever decide or need to review it in the future. And so I encourage everyone to support this recommendation moving forward.
Councillor Davey, you have comments?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in agreement with Councillor Galloway Seelock. I did think that ticketing overnight in the summer months was needlessly punitive, and I wasn't sure really what type of behavior we were trying to change. There is a cost to this, but when you consider the implications I think of people that want to, the social gatherings that we have in our community, where people would otherwise be concerned about going to a friend's house for an evening and having a ticket. And even worse than that, that tiny bit of incentive to drive home when perhaps they shouldn't be driving home, and us sort of enforcing that behavior. So I'm very much in favor of this. I've heard no concerns or complaints about it whatsoever, and I'm happy it's before us, and I'll be happy to support it.
Okay, we have no further comments. Oh, Councillor Fernandez.
Sorry, just a quick comment. I think that this is a good way of helping the community work together on when your neighbors have friends over and there are people who have been drinking. But I do have a bit of a concern, and it's more ward specific, I think, than anything else. Is the student population in some of the infill sites that I have in my ward, where there isn't sufficient parking, and every time I drive past a particular address, there is always cars in front of that building every single day, every single evening that I'm going past there, and it's infuriating to the people who've lived on that street who've not had to deal with overnight parking in front of their houses. So I see that this is a great way to pilot it. I think education, and I think it's great that some of the councillors have written about this in their articles. Education is key, and I think it will help people understand that that we're doing this for a year. But and I hate to be punitive to some other wards where the issues are ongoing. But I'll support it this time, but I'm going to be really watching what's happening in the specific areas within my ward, and be very interested to hear from any other ward councillors if they see the same kind of problems in specific areas, especially around infills that are not offering the appropriate amount of parking.
I just want to be clear, this is no longer becoming a pilot. This is ongoing, and it's not for 1 year. Last year it was for 1 year, but this is an ongoing direction. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. It's okay.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I want to say that I support this. I think this is a great way to go. It is ironic, though, that we're supporting you and not enforcing our bylaws, which I believe is the right way to do it. And there are other things that have come up around this horseshoe that I wish we would have done the same thing. I think the way it's set up now, we have chronic abusers of this, and those are the ones that people complain about, and I think we can still deal with those people. For the majority of people, I mean, the 3 hours is reasonable and it works well, and I mean, theoretically, someone could go over and visit at 9 in the morning and stay till 1. They've broken the law, but that we're enforcing chronic abusers. So I think this is a good way to go. Thank you.
Okay, no further comments. Recorder vote has been called for. You may proceed on voting. Councillor Gazzola, can you... It's been carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is dealing with Guelph Street traffic calming review. Justin Redmond. Mr. Redmond's going to be speaking on behalf of staff for the report. Let me just click you in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you may recall, report number INS 14-006 for the Guelph Street traffic calming review was presented to Community and Infrastructure Services Committee on February 3rd, 2014. And at that time, there was a delegation that requested the investigation into the removal of the crossing guard as well as the raised crosswalk at Edwin Street. Staff have gone back and reviewed the need for the raised crosswalk and do support the removal of the raised crosswalk at Edwin Street. However, a school crossing guard is still warranted at Edwin Street. So the changes to this reduce the cost of the raised crosswalk, and the only costs outlined in the financial implications are for the sharrows and the related signage, as the rest of this will be rolled into the reconstruction projects outlined in 2016 and 2017.
Councillor Dan Glengram.
I'll move it.
We don't have any questions. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. That was good. No, we'll go back to 6 after we deal with item number 5 right now. So the traffic calming policy and priority is up next. And Barry Cronkite is here. No? Justin, you're going to be addressing? Okay. Go ahead, Justin.
Through the chair, report number INS 13-106, traffic calming policy, was originally presented to committee on Monday, November 25th, 2013. At that time, staff were requested to go back and consult with the community on the traffic calming policy. We held a public information center on January 28th between 4 and 7 p.m. At the time, we had 4 members of the public attend the PIC. Since we had a low turnout and no comments related to the actual policy, we sent a copy of the policy to all neighborhood associations. We received no feedback from the neighborhood associations. And then we initiated an online survey where we had 38 people view the survey and 4 provide feedback. The feedback we did receive on the policy were to use stop signs as a traffic calming method, which staff don't support. Stop signs should only be used where warranted and not as traffic calming features. One of the comments was to interview residents on adjacent streets. We have outlined in our policy that we do plan on surveying residents on adjacent streets. However, that will not form part of our decision. The residents that live along the street should be the ones that have a say in what type of traffic calming features occur along the street. However, we will present the results of the survey for council's decision. One thing to keep in mind with respect to that as well is that the shift away from vertical traffic calming measures will likely significantly reduce the number of complaints we receive from adjacent residents, since that has been the bulk of the concern that we've received to date is the use of vertical measures and slowing of EMS service vehicles. And then the other component we received comments on is greater input to initiate a study. And we have changed the policy to require a minimum of 25% of residents along the street support the proposed traffic calming rather than just a minimum of 25% actually responding to the survey. So through that, we're bringing this report back to endorse the recommendation to repeal the previous traffic calming policy and replace it with the one attached to this report.
Thanks, Justin. We do have a couple questions for you. Councillor Gazzola.
I wonder if you could briefly outline the difference between the old report that you're repealing and the new one. Is that a simple or difficult thing to do?
Carmichael? Sorry, Mr. Carmichael. Go ahead, Mr. Carmichael.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, the chair, to the committee. I will give my best attempt to summarize the differences between the previous policy and the new policy, and I might call on Mr. Cronkite to assist me on this as he worked more closely with it. Having said that, we've changed the priority ranking for the roadways. We placed a bottom-up value into the assessment of all roadways that have been requested for traffic calming. In other words, they have to meet a minimum requirement, that being the speed requirement of 10 kilometers per over or 10 kilometers per hour or over the speed limit on that roadway, or if it's plus 1,000 vehicles per day on that roadway. That's a reflection of the fact that we have speeding problems, but we also have a fairly significant volume of traffic. At the same time, we recognize that volume or high speeds on low volume roadways should be addressed, and in that regard, speeds in excess of 65 kilometers per hour, but their volumes are less than 1,000, will be considered for traffic calming. The practice with the residents, the public outreach practice with the policy, the new policy in comparison to the old policy is very similar in that we conduct a minimum of two public meetings with the residents. The final survey is probably has a change to it, and what's proposed in the past policy, we surveyed only the residents that directly live on the street that will be addressed with traffic calming measures. And we fed those survey results through the report to the committee and council for their consideration. What we're proposing through the new policy, and this is a reflection of some feedback we've gotten on a number of reviews, where people living on adjacent side streets feel that they should have an equal vote to what goes on to the roadway as far as traffic calming measures go. what we've done to incorporate that, as Justin Reedman has advised, is that we're proposing that we will still survey the residents on the directly affected roadway, and staff's recommendations to committee will be based on those directly affected residents. But at the same time, we will be surveying residents within that same neighborhood that have no choice but to use that roadway to get in and out of their neighborhood. We do not intend to use that feedback from those adjacent roadways in the staff's recommendation for measures on the roadway, but we do intend to place that information into the report for council so they have that information for consideration. We strongly, based on our experience we've had with this practice or this traffic calming business over the last 10 years, is we would not recommend using the residents that do not live on the direct roadway as a recommendation for staff's report. The reason I say that is the people living on the street compared to the people living on the adjacent streets and just using that street have a completely different mandate for that roadway. The people living on the street are subject to that traffic all day long. They're subject to the speeds. They have to get in and out of their own driveway onto that roadway. It's their children playing on their front yards exposed to that traffic on the roadway. Whereas the people that live in the adjacent streets in the neighborhood, it's purely their method to get to and from home, whether it's to work or to recreational purposes. And I would suggest the mandate would be different between those two groups. The people living on the roadway obviously want to see the traffic calmed as best as possible to make that roadway as safe as possible for them. Whereas the residents living on the adjacent roadways, I would suggest are probably more concerned with any obstructions they have that might get in their way to get their way to work. So traffic calming is often seen as obstructions to that route. Mr. Reed made an excellent point in that our new policy is also reflecting the impact on both our emergency service groups in responding to an emergency, as well as our transit, our GRT, our Grand River Transit within the community. In that regard, we are proposing a significantly less number of vertical measures on both emergency routes and transit routes. In fact, we're proposing no vertical measures on transit routes as long as they have 2 buses an hour, and we're also proposing no vertical measures on emergency response routes. Our experience with past reviews is the input we received from neighborhoods, the streets in the adjacent neighborhood, as Justin mentioned, they're concerned with going over those vertical measures. We're confident that the new policy that will be implementing less vertical measures will generate less concerns and complaints from the adjacent neighborhoods. So in that regard, we feel that the pushback from the people not living on the actual roadway will be greatly reduced just on the measures that we'll be proposing through this new policy. So that speaks to one of the probably most significant impacts of our new policy is reducing the number of vertical measures on our roadways out there. We've quickly discovered through our reviews that traffic calming and speed humps, frankly, and specifically are the most effective way to slow cars down, but it comes at a cost, and the cost would be to emergency service response, as well as the impact on our transit users, both the users themselves and the comfort level, but also the impact on the maintenance of these vehicles, and that would be both for transit vehicles and emergency vehicles. So we will be challenged to control speeds using more horizontal features, that being road narrowings, traffic circles, medians, measures like that to control the traffic. But quite frankly, it's probably a better reflection of the function of that roadway, that it is intended to carry traffic, and we have to be cognizant of that fact. I believe I've spoken far too much, but I think that capsulizes.
Can I just go over what you said?
I'm sorry?
Can I just ask you from what you've said, or are
Yes,
you
go
done?
ahead.
I'm sorry.
There is 3 other changes to the policy based on council's direction at the last meeting, which was where there's a natural feature, an environmental feature, and the cutoff points are not met, that we consider those roads that are 10% below the cutoff feature for speed and volume, as well as a wording change. Developers should be required to design streets that limit the potential for excessive speed and volume. We've changed that to developers will be required to design streets that limit the potential for excessive speed and volume to the satisfaction of the Director of Transportation Services. And previously, we had community destinations along the roadway. We've expanded that boundary to 450 meters around the roadway being studied to accommodate those points for pedestrians that would be accessing those sites.
Okay, can I just, those last three things are sort of little tweaks that you're doing, right? To the current system. So basically, from what I gather, the first thing is that there are certain little different requirements in order to get on the list in the first place, right?
In response, yeah, there's a minimum requirement that's clearly defined through the
Whereas
policy.
before, it got on the list quite easily.
Correct.
Yeah. And then the next thing is, you're still coming from what I understand. You're still coming back with a recommendation based on the residents who live on the street, but you're going to provide council with additional information. You're not making any changes. You're just going to provide council with a little more information, and then they can change it if they want.
That's an excellent way to say it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And just so out of this, you're saying you're going to have less vertical measures. Now, is that what tends you to? Is that something that you're going to aim for? There's nothing in our recommendations that we're going to have less vertical measures, but it's something that you're saying that you're going to try to look at different ways of doing it. Is that right?
Yeah, through the chair, in direct response to concerns raised by GRT and our fire department about concerns about vertical deflections, we've changed the policy that requires more stringent factors to allow a vertical measure. In other words, a lot of roadways that now currently would allow for a vertical measure will not under the new policy. And that's music to GRT and the fire department's ears that we're addressing directly their concerns.
But you're still going to deal with them in other ways.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. And I welcome some of the fact that you put in the comment sheets, although there were only 4. One of the gentlemen or ladies, I should never assume, I thought made a valid point with regard to stop signs, notwithstanding the fact that MTO doesn't like to use stop signs for traffic calming. I think their point was well taken. It costs a lot less, and it's a lot less intrusive to GRT and emergency services. I'd add a couple of comments or questions about the proposed traffic policy. Number 7, you said 25% of residents directly fronting the street under the review must be in favor. Is 25% really reflective of what the will of that street is? I mean, why are we not using a higher number? And I just grabbing out of the air, I thought 45%, but 25%. I mean, if you've got 10 people, 25% of that is something like that, 2.5. That's really nothing.
Through the chair, that initial 25% factor is merely, what it is doing is allowing staff to show that there's an interest from the local residents to proceed with the traffic calming review. At that point, there's no indication of supportive measures. It's just simply support from the residents that a traffic calming review should be conducted based on the concerns they have on traffic conditions. The higher requirements of higher percentages come into the final survey through the actual review, where we are ensuring that the local residents have majority support for the measures we're recommending.
And that would be number 9. Thanks for that clarification. Right. So that would be number 9. That 50% of the residents directly fronting the road.
Correct.
And again, I would challenge that we need to have a even higher than 60%. Again, if you're looking at 6, that would be 6 out of 10. We're right on the edge there. You know, I mean, I think I'd rather err on a higher number than a lower number, because sometimes we've seen, you know, like 59% or something like that. You know, a clear indication of people being concerned with traffic calming and wanting it.
In response, through the chair, we did survey a number of other municipalities who have traffic calming policies in effect as well, and that was a very common theme through all the other municipalities, was that 60% support factor. without being a statistics expert, I would suggest that we might want to be cautioned to raise that level too high, because we get into the point where we've got, say, if we were to bump it up to 70 or 75%, if you've got 68% in support of putting in measures, that's over 2/3.
Yep.
You're going to get a lot of feedback from the residents suggesting you've got your majority, let's put it in. So the 60% is reflection that it's greater than just half, and reflecting that there's at least a measurable majority of the residents in support of the measures. And keep in mind, we do come back a year later after the measures are in, we redo all our studies, we feed that information to all the residents, and we resurvey them again after the fact to make sure that they still support the measures being in place.
Okay. I like the idea that you're talking about new and innovative methods. Can you give me an example? Or give council? I think I know what you're talking about, but maybe council.
Through the chair, there's some places that do intersection painting for low-volume intersections where the community designs a mural and paints a mural in the middle of the intersection. So Halifax has done a number of those, Portland, different places. Some places incentivize people going under the speed limit, so everybody that goes under the speed limit adds 1 cent or a fraction of a cent to a community development fund that goes towards neighborhood cleanup, things like that. So those are types of measures that could be explored outside the traditional traffic calming realm of measures.
Okay.
And if we were to investigate any of those, we would come forward to council with a recommendation for implementation of those measures as well.
Yeah, and we've had discussion about this before, Mr. Edmund. We've talked about narrowing of streets and even plantings can often be a great visual slower down of speeds. Okay, my last question, comment, I guess, is number 15, and absolutely, I'm really pleased to see that you're going to be saying developers will design streets, because far too often they get away with designing a really nice thoroughfare which allows the traffic to just tear down that street. So again, I'm glad to hear that we're doing that. Do you have some examples? Are you just suggesting that maybe the roads be a bit more windy and not quite as straight and clear, which of course is a challenge for our snowplow operators, right?
Through the chair, recent examples of that would be down in the Dune South area, the Robert Ferry, the newer areas we've implemented and had the developers implement a number of road narrowings. Also the new subdivision over in the Fairway Lackner area. Same thing, we have narrowings installed, but we're also encouraging the developers to put more roundabouts within these subdivisions as well, obviously at the higher volume roadways. To this point, we have not had the developers implement traffic circles in the local roadways, but that's another example or another measure that we could use on the lower volume roadways that would be a very effective way of calming traffic through residential roadways as well. So there's a significant number of measures that are in our toolbox, for lack of a better word, that will be a lot more proactive with our subdivision developers on getting those in.
Okay.
And we've gotten great feedback from them and been putting them in.
Mr. Redmond was indicating he had another response as well.
Through the chair, we're also looking at pushing for more modified grid networks, which help distribute the traffic through the neighborhood and put less reliance on pushing everybody towards 1 or 2 streets in the neighborhood. So it helps distribute and calm the traffic somewhat as well.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mayor Zaire?
Thank you. Some of my questions have been asked already, which is good. I take it from some of the response from staff that Fire, EMS, GRT have seen this report and they are pleased with the results?
Through the chair, yes, we've actually sat down and met with them on these issues.
Okay. And in terms of the surrounding neighborhoods and surrounding streets, I agree that they don't, they're not the immediately affected individuals and residents, but depending on what the traffic calming measure is, and I suppose it will be less without the vertical deflections, and that's maybe the mitigating factor here, that they could end up being affected by diversion. And did you consider the surrounding residents' streets having some, not only some say in it or some hearing their comments, but weighting them in, to some extent, whether it be 25% and those are on the street, or 100%, or whatever factor was put to it? Did you get to consider that?
Yes, through the chair. In response to that, Our investigation with other municipalities and their policies showed no other municipalities surveying outside of that area and putting a weighted factor on it. It would be very arbitrary. Quite frankly, I think it would be very difficult to define what that weight factor should be. I think, as you said, that the fact that we're reducing the number of vertical measures going out there should reduce the issue. The only thing that I'd be concerned about with this is the message we may be sending to those adjacent residents, in that we're giving them a survey, but at the same time telling them their vote won't count to the final recommendation. We might want to consider some other way of notification of those residents. I'm open ears on that issue.
Well, just on that point, I think that by eliminating vertical measures, that it will take away a lot of the diversion, and so perhaps it won't be as bad, and so some of the interest from neighboring streets. However, if we do send out the notice, I think if you put in bold and big box or something, simply to say the condition under which they're making those comments, so that it cannot be misconstrued later on when they show up here at council. The last thing is, in terms of the those places and streets where now vertical measures are in place, is the intent simply to leave them there until the road needs to be replaced, repaired, or is there some other measure going to be taken to change those?
Through the chair, all those measures, as council are aware, have gone through an extensive public process, and it's something that has been agreed upon by staff and council after dealing with the local residents. Staff's perspective on this right now is that we have no intentions of taking any measures out. Obviously, we continue to monitor these locations. We are not getting our meetings with Grand River Transit and the emergency service groups. While they didn't support the measures on the whole, they haven't gotten to the point of suggesting that we start removing measures. I don't want to speak for them, but I think they'd be very pleased going forward with what we're proposing and living with what we have in place now, recognizing that it's gone through a public process.
Okay. Just so you don't have to come back to me, I support the recommendation. Getting rid of the vertical measures is what I was concerned about, and so I will support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yes, you've answered Mayor Zara's question as for those streets that already have the vertical measures. How about the streets that have been approved but there hasn't been installation done yet? Are we going to focus the changes to those streets as well?
Through the chair, in response to that question, I'll repeat that they've gone through a public process and it's been approved. Or if we've already initiated a public process, we've created an expectation with those residents based on the previous policy. We've also communicated to GRT and the emergency service groups that current reviews underway we intend to carry through under the old policy. And that's only in fairness of, we don't want to start at square one with each of our reviews with the residents and go back and basically say, okay, we're going to have to start again because some things are off the table. So in the interest of still maintaining the local residents' concerns, we're continuing as we are now. And there's a limited number of reviews that currently are underway.
I appreciate those comments, but I think there are only a limited number of streets that would be affected by this. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it would be a significant undertaking. This is response to your answer. That if we were to just reply back or directly engage those that responded to our survey in asking their preference or recommendation as to the changes. Because once they're in, and you answered that earlier. Mm-hmm. So now is an opportunity to do it, to ensure that we, they didn't have a choice before. Mm-hmm. The residents that were in favor of implementing controls, there was only one option. But now there are a multitude of different options that are considered. And we have to avail those opportunities to those residents. And I think it would be not fair to engage it so.
Well, in response to that, I would suggest that our experience with the local residents on the more local roadways and where we are putting vertical measures in is they recognize that those are the measures that work. And if we were to go back to them suggesting that we're going to take vertical measures out and replace them with horizontal measures, I can't anticipate that we'd get a whole lot of buy-in from the local residents on that. And again, I don't believe it's as simple as going back and saying we can't put vertical measures in. Can we put these in instead? I do believe that we would almost pretty much have to start at square one and outline what we can and can't do with the residents before we can proceed.
No, Mr. Michael, Carmichael, I'm not going to try to argue with you over this, especially because I want to keep in my good books. You're very important here. But at least we can look at one street at least to see what the impact would be, to see the response, and then gauge depending on the response that we get back. So anyways, I can continue on this conversation offline. I think further conversation does need to be had before we go forward. And I'll quickly make my comments for the changes. I am very supportive of what this has come forward. There were very limited options available to residents when they had issues with speeding on the streets. I think this is a significant paradigm shift on the way that we look at traffic calming and implement features to add security to pedestrians and motorists on our road networks. And I think this is a great way forward. So good job to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. With respect to the minimums, in the past, when we haven't hit those minimums in terms of the number of residents responding or those in favor, the recommendation would still come to council under the old policy on occasion. Is that going to continue to happen?
I believe I understood your question correctly. Yes, all the survey results will come back to committee and council for their approval.
So whether we hit the minimums or not, it comes to council with a recommendation?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so we don't have a support. If we don't have the local support, we do forward a report for committee's council or consideration based on the lack of support for it.
Okay, and I'll just comment very quickly as well. I'll support this. I'm not a huge fan of horizontal deflections, but I like vertical deflections even less. So I'm happy to see that this is the route that we're going. I think it's appropriate, and hoping that the residents are more in favor as well.
Thank you. Councillor Everington.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. I should say up front, I have a major conflict on this because I got speed bumps in front of my house. At least I think that's what they're called. I was glad to hear that you're not going to remove those devices that are already in place, but I wonder what you are going to do when those devices don't do anything at all anyway. They don't deter speeding traffic. They don't deter inappropriate traffic. So what are you going to do for those people? And the signs on the devices are already fading. So I was just curious what you would do on those streets where there is those kind of problems.
Through the chair, I would appreciate more further information from the councillor on where you're suggesting they're not working. Our studies have shown that the vertical measures have been extremely effective in creating safer traffic conditions, obviously slowing down the traffic. If you're referring specifically to your location in front of your home, you're already in a slow speed location on that roadway, so that the impact of the hump is not going to be nearly as impactful as it would be on a roadway where speeds are typically 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. Does that answer your question?
I'll take this offline, but you've got to be kidding on slow traffic, really.
I'm sorry?
Anyway, I'll talk to you offline, but
well, slow is relative. I can appreciate that.
We have speeding traffic down that road.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
Fair enough.
I do support this change, though. I just wonder, when I was in Kleinberg at the weekend and I hit some speed bumps, almost took the bottom out of my car, so they certainly slowed me down.
Okay. Councillor Gallo, is yours a comment? Okay. Councillor Gazzola, I have you in here. Are you going to be asking questions, or it's... I have a comment. I didn't get to make a comment. Okay, you can...
I do want to ask a question.
You have the mic. You go ahead.
Okay. No, I just want to reiterate the question. From what I understood, it is going to be less vertical measures, not eliminate vertical measures.
Correct.
Okay, that's because I thought I was hearing things there, and so they're going in the direction that I thought. I do challenge these people on their stance on stop streets. And the department, the division, you've always had this, the philosophy that you have that stop signs don't really work. I know that in looking at this out on Deer Ridge, some stop signs were put in, and I think they've worked tremendously. Now, you may be right, but I would like to see some solid statistics where stop signs are in, and there still are a lot of accidents there because people aren't obeying them. I know that if I even think about not obeying them, there's always a couple of police officers around. Anyhow, I would like to see some more empirical information on that stop signs don't work, but that's for another day. I want to start off by saying I don't like traffic calming at all. Like everyone else, I like to get into the car and we all tend to speed. But having said that, I think what we've done here over the past few years has been, I think we've had a very positive impact. We were looking at something that was before us just a couple of weeks ago. It was on another issue. I think it might have been on sidewalks or something, but they had results of some traffic calming in there, and it was amazing the improvement in the reduction in speeds and traffic on streets. So I think it's accomplishing what it was intended to accomplish, and I think staff have come out with some reasonable compromises. I think they're also prepared to look wherever possible to try to get away from vertical measures, but in the final analysis, I believe it's doing what it's intended to do. I find traffic calming is getting wider and wider use. You drive to Toronto, drive to some areas in downtown Toronto, downtown side streets full of traffic calming. I'm finding even in Europe now where speeds sometimes get carried away there, they're using traffic calming. So I think it's something that is working, and I think we've had it in place. Your staff, I think staff have done an excellent job. They have a lot of public engagement. They have several meetings and spend a lot of time with the public dealing with these issues. So, and they've come back and they have tweaked it. And I think we need to go forward with this. And I'm sure that in a few years they will look at this again. So, I'd ask for a recorded vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, this is one issue that I've said before that I hear from many residents on with regards to speeding. I think we're headed in a great new direction, and I'm really happy to see that the changes I brought forward in December are in this policy with regards to the developers with the community destinations, as well as adding some streets with the environmental features that don't necessarily meet the criteria, but they need to be on the list for potential review too. So I'm really excited about this new policy. I think it's been a long time in the making, but I think it's been done right, and it really gives us strong direction moving forward. I also think that with some of the suggestions that we need to go back and review some of the streets that have already been reviewed. I think there's many more on the list that we need to get to, and that we need to move forward on those reviews and not look back on the past. I think we did the best we could with the information we had at the time, and I think now it's time to just move forward and look at the new measures, or potentially the same measures on the streets that are currently on the list.
Councillor Fernandez, thank you.
Thanks. There's some really good changes to this policy, and I'm really pleased to see that. But for some reason, my brain is not connecting the dots on this, and I want to make sure I'm understanding. You're saying less vertical measures, which means signage, right? And more or the same horizontal, which means speed humps. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through the chair, in response to that, no, vertical measures are the speed humps, your raised crosswalks.
Okay.
The horizontal measures are where we're deflecting the traffic on their straight line path. In other words, we're putting a median or a narrowing in.
Okay, all right. So I get you now. Sorry about that, but I don't know, it just wasn't computing properly, and I kept thinking I can't make proper comments if I'm going to be talking about the opposite thing of what I want to say. Although the MTO's dislike for stop signs as a traffic measure, traffic calming measure has been stated, I certainly see where even if people are doing a rolling stop, and I realize that that's illegal, it means that they are slowing down, because they're slowing down not only because they see a stop sign, but they fear that a policeman is sitting waiting for them to give them a nice fat ticket. So it does affect behavior, but it doesn't affect our EMS or our GRT buses and transit. As far as the reviewing of streets that have not been installed, I think there were a couple of really contentious traffic calming discussions in the last few months, and some of them were really borderline in terms of the support for them. I realize that it's probably not always beneficial to look back, but I wouldn't mind having a review of a couple of those streets. I think that might be of some value. I know some of the residents at the time were talking about wanting to wait until the policy had been tweaked and changed. So I'd really like to take a look at that. One of the things that I've seen in my ward, and it was a new initiative, was the speed cushions. It hasn't worked, to be quite frank with you. It has cost us a lot more money on the stakes. I don't know how many we've had to replace, but I think if we're going to be looking at those kind of horizontal measures, vertical measures, sorry, we should be doing it straight across the road. It's what's happening now is people are literally driving down the middle of the road. Even though it's a nice yellow line, they're driving right down the middle of the road to avoid them. And I think we're ending up with a lot more near-miss collisions than if there was a full... Because certainly at the school, in front of St. Kateri, everybody's slowing down. But where the speed cushions are, they're driving right down the middle of the road. So those are my comments. I think we've done a really good job, and I look forward to seeing some of them implemented in the coming years.
Thank you. Councillor Dan Glenn-Graham.
Thanks very much. And I think that, it's kind of a running joke that we just need to leave the potholes in place and maybe we'd have speed calming right there. But I think that this is good for education. I like the fact that, you're taking into consideration more people around the neighborhood, but you're really directing council to your recommendations are going to be based on those people directly affected. I think that makes sense. I like the fact that we're deferring to emergency services as a priority. I think that's absolutely essential for the safety of our community and also for the cost of the repairs and maintenance of those vehicles you pointed out as well. And I like the forward thinking you're having in terms of narrowing of the roads, because from everything that I've gleaned in our discussions, I think that that's the best way to slow down traffic. Whether it's parking on the sides, the only issue there is winter. And when you have snow accumulation, I think that's when we have to get into looking at parking restrictions. That's a little bit of a dicey thing. We've started to tweak that now on a road-by-road basis. We're getting into a lot more management of those. So I just think that's the only consideration that we have to really have as we go forward. But a really good job in this.
Thank you. I have a bit of a comment. I just wanted to, I'm very happy to see this here. I want to thank staff for their hard work in bringing this report and making the changes that I think are sensible, and not that the old system was bad either, but I think the whole process in general is a sensitive issue, and I think it pits neighbor against neighbor, and I think the reality is the bottom line is I think residents need to take some ownership in where they purchase their homes, and they got to understand if they're buying a house on a busy street. I'm not sure what they expect from the municipality to correct those situations, but we'll do our best. And so I'm glad to see this here, and I'm going to be supporting this. And did I hear recorded vote on this one as well? Okay, recorded vote. Oh yeah, do we have a mover? Councillor Fernandez. That's carried unanimous. And so we'll move on to the consent item number 6. And Councillor Scott Davey moves that. So Councillor Gazzola, you have a question on item number 6?
I just had a theoretical question or something. I was just looking at the first 2 or 3. There's, the points are far enough apart, and there's really not much argument. But then there's a whole group in the 60s, and they're a point apart. And there are a couple of streets, I'll be honest about it, there are a couple of streets in the ward that I represent included in that group. Is there a way of when you have a whole group like that are all within one point, can you appeal it, or can I appeal it?
Go ahead, Mr. Carmichael.
If you could just comment
sorry.
on it, I don't, because one point. How do you like there are 4 or 5 different categories. One point is.
Through the chair, these would get reviewed on an annual basis, so those points may change over time as traffic volumes and development happens around different neighborhoods. The other thing to remember is that every year we would come back with a list for council's consideration, like this list in this report, which would allow council to decide whether or not to have certain projects go forward, which would bring another project up that would be below it on the list.
Are there certain criteria that are more important than others?
Through the chair, we factored the factors or the different issues related to traffic calming accordingly and placed pretty much equal weighting. I shouldn't say that. We placed higher weighting on the volume and speed through this policy. The past policy was a lot more consistent in that it kind of applied the same value to each factor. We've recognized through this new policy that the basic idea of traffic calming is to deal directly with the speeding and traffic concerns. So through our new policy, it's recognizing the speed and volume is factored much higher, and will dictate the locations that we're recommending more so. And as Justin mentioned, we update the studies every year, and it's important to note that when we sit down as staff at the end of each year and go through all the locations through our priority list that we have in the report in front of you, we'll also take other things into consideration. If there's a tie into the cycling master plan and an opportunity to put some cycling facilities in, we might recommend one location over another because we're getting more benefit out of it by getting the cycling aspect involved in it as well. So there's a number of other things that we'll look at that might sway staff's recommendation, but at the end of the day, we feed that information to you as recommendations, you as council, and it's your decision as to what locations are actually chosen for review for that upcoming year.
Okay, just on that, and that's fine. Do you, for example, to check the speeding, do you visit once? Do you visit twice? Do you visit, is the criteria the same for every location?
Through the chair, our studies are conducted wherever we get a requested location for traffic calming, we'll conduct 1 week's worth of studies at that location. So we will collect 7 days, 24 hours a day of speed and volume data. So it gives us excellent data, and each location are based on the same 1 week study assumption.
Okay, that's good. Now the other thing is when you review it every year, do you do the week's study again?
Through the chair, if the location has not been recommended for review, yes. The ones that qualify and meet our minimum requirement, we will update those studies each and every year.
Yeah, if they're on the list here towards the top,
correct,
you'll do the same 1 week study again?
Every year.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Zaire?
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions on 6.1. Those three. If I take a look at the list, and then the maps, the length of the studies are considerably longer in at least 2 of the 3 cases than the list states. Can you comment on that first?
Through the chair, we, as staff sat down and looked at the locations that have been requested, specifically West Heights Drive. If I were to speak specific to West Heights Drive, while we have an isolated section was put on the traffic calming report, our cycling master plan is recommending implementation of cycling facilities through that entire corridor. So we've determined, or recommending at the staff level, to do the entire roadway. We think it's just good business, especially for a roadway like West Heights. It's not really broken up by arterial roadways, that if we do the entire length, the residents should feel comfortable that we're addressing the entire roadway and not ignoring some sections of it.
Okay, thank you. And then that might make sense. Considering what we've just passed on item number 11 and the new protocols, I think all 3 of these would be considered collectors, not arterial, but collectors.
All major collectors, yes.
Well, Dune South Village and Dune Village and West Heights would be considered major collectors, right?
That's correct.
So therefore, in these particular cases, there would be no vertical deflections.
It's probably a very fair assumption at this point, yes.
Well, that's number 3. It says they won't be.
Yes, there won't be.
Thank you.
Unless something, there's nothing that would come up that would dictate that. The only time that we've recommended vertical measures on major collector roadways or even collector roadways is if it's a site school specific issue where we can put a raised crosswalk in to significantly increase school safety and the children's safety. That in some isolated cases, we've had the emergency service groups recognize that benefit and be acknowledging of the fact that they'll put up with 1 vertical measure. But in these locations, I don't anticipate anything.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. Just reread your number 3 on page 11-12. Thank you. Thanks, that's it.
Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. I'm really pleased that 2 of these reviews are coming through my ward because I've heard so many complaints, but specifically the first one, which is the Dune South Drive, because of the change in the age group of kids who will be walking along that stretch to Dune Public School. Although you say there would likely not be any horizontal deflections. Vertical. Thank you. Thank you. We do need to look at some ways of slowing down the traffic, especially at Dune Village Road and Dune South, where there's going to be numerous kids crossing and getting to the school. So that will be part of the review as well?
Through the chair, yes, that certainly will be part of the review, and it's also probably important to note that I'm sitting on the project team for the Homer, as you are, Councillor Fernandez, for the Homer Watson, and we're looking at the intersection control at Dune South and Homer Watson. There might be some positives to take out of a new design there as well.
Right. And I'm looking forward to that meeting as well. As far as the Dune Village Road review, is it possible to go as far as Tilt? And the reason I say that is, although you can't see it on this map, from Anvil down to Tilt is a fairly steep grade. And people coming from Tilt Drive use that as sort of a speeding up ramp, and people coming down there to Tilt Drive seem to have an aversion to using their brakes until just before they get to that stop sign. So if we could continue the study in that portion, I think that would be very beneficial. I think you may see a difference in the speed from that point on, from Anvil down. even from Bechtel, because there is that grade really starts right there.
Through the chair, in response to that, we'd be more than happy to extend the limits of that down to Tilt. Our thinking at the staff level was that there's no houses fronting between Anvil and Tilt. So yeah, I can see the benefit in including in that. So we'd be more than happy to extend that to that limit.
Sorry? Sorry. Okay. The other question would be when you're reviewing the traffic, and you've heard this from me before, but at Pioneer Drive where there's stoplights, the lane designation right now is creating a huge bottleneck, and we've got people who are who should be turning and going straight and cutting off people who are going straight. So, will you be looking at that, or is that more of a regional issue?
Through the chair, in response, we definitely will be including that, and that was actually part of our motivation for recommending this location for review. We have been working back in the scenes on the Dune Village Pioneer intersection and working with the region on it. And it's also recommended in our transportation master plan to review that corridor. So we're going to encompass everything together and hopefully come up with a good solution for that.
And just the last question, I thought I saw it, but no, I can't recollect. The timing for this was to be happening.
These reviews would be initiated this year.
This year, spring, summer, late fall.
I would like to think we'd hold our first public meeting for these before the summer break.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is that I'd like to write about this in my next column, so then I will give people a heads up about it. Okay. Thanks.
Feel free to contact me offline to confirm that exactly.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, the point that I was trying to get Councillor Fernandez to make, there's also a park right at Tilt and Dune Mills, so I think there is an advantage in looking all the way down. Even though there is a stop sign there, there's one on the top of the hill, so may just be add a few extra bonus points to that road. And since I have my mic on, I wouldn't have made a comment otherwise, but having represented Dune South before, much needed on that street, as there is many other streets in the area, but definitely happy to see the one Dune South Drive moving forward.
Okay, we have no further questions. It's been moved by, I can't recall who did it, Councillor Davey. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We have our last item, which is the Festival of Neighborhood Capital Grant. Oh, Mr. May.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We didn't intend to make a presentation. I think it's a pretty straightforward report about reallocating existing funds. Having said that, staff are available for questions, as well as John McDonald, who is here representing the Festival of Neighborhoods.
Okay. Okay, I'm just, Councillor Singh, you didn't ring in, but, okay. Is this, do you want to ask a question?
I was just going to say I'll move it.
You'll move it? Okay.
Wasn't sure if ringing in was necessary for that.
Okay. All right. So I'll go with you, Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, I actually do have a question with regards to this. My question would be probably to, I would assume, John. Or whoever really collectively made this decision, but I'd probably like to hear John's thoughts on this. Was it thought of, or was any thought given to potentially only giving closer to, say, an $18,000 grant and allowing some extra funds to kind of accumulate in order for some projects that may need more of a top-up, where some may come in close to $18,000, some may need, $21,000 or $22,000?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
I just want to know your thoughts on that.
I don't believe that was specifically discussed. My thinking, though, just off the cuff on that, is that it would be very difficult to run a kind of surplus and deficit where some groups might, in theory, be getting more support and having less need to raise the further funds, which they often do, associated with the project. Over the years, we've had a lot of debate about the arbitrariness of the award, and even the arbitrariness of how it is selected, just to sort of reach in and pull out. But I think at the end of the day, it provides this extremely level playing field. And I think that if we had a top-up surplus up-down, that might muddy the waters just a hair. But I have to admit, we did not discuss that.
Okay, that's fair. And then my other question would be, because currently it's suggested that it be $20,980. Would, I'm assuming I know the answer to this, but would it not make more sense just to give $21,000 and add the extra $20?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the potential is that we've sort of got ourselves into this pickle where the $10,000 capital grant over 20 years is purchasing in construction dollars far less than that at this point. We might hope that going forward we link this to inflation, or we otherwise sort of review this maybe a little more periodically than once every 20 years. So whether 21,000, 21,200, 400, these things tend to sort of accumulate in a percentage manner. We would probably always be rounding in some way, but that may factor into it. I don't know.
Okay, with that, I would have a recommendation. I can wait. I can do that now, or I can wait until.
You can go ahead and put forward your recommendation.
My recommendation would just be that it's staff recommendation, but to $21,000. It's just a much better figure to work with than $20,980.
Okay. Councillor Davey.
Thanks. I won't quibble, but I guess that was my concern as well. This is an advertised and publicly awarded amount, so for the sake of my OCD, I was actually going to suggest that we round it down and put the $980 towards Tier 2, but I'm fine with it as it is.
Councillor Gazzola.
Is it my turn? I'm not cutting in and...
No, you're good.
Okay, good. I'm just curious, this example is provided for us here where the total expenditures ended up at $37,000. Who approved that? Or what was the project and who approved it? Did council approve that?
The project that you're referring to, the excess amounts of dollars were provided through operations. They had work to do in that area, and they were, as far as I understand, were going to be doing that work, and so they needed to make that happen along with the work that the Festival of Neighborhoods grant was working on.
So that the point here is really not relevant then. From what I took it, is that 10,000 isn't enough. But you're saying, well, they had this work to do anyhow. I just don't understand how we have a $10,000 project becomes a $38,000 project.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that the example provided, in that case, we were lucky that we were able to find one that the volunteer group, the neighborhoods, wanted, at the same time as our parks and operations staff were already planning for some work. And so my understanding is that they combined the two bodies of work to complete a greater project.
Which is fine. That could happen every year.
It could if we're lucky enough to find a neighbor. I mean, keep in mind that the projects are mostly chosen by the neighborhood group, so we don't have that decision-making ability.
Well, to me, I find this it was a very generous thing, the whole concept, and that if a neighborhood put their heads together long enough, they would come up with something that living within their means. So,
through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could just respond to that. I think that 20 years ago it was a very generous contribution. The $10,000 grant has not increased for 20 years. What we're finding is that $10,000 when you're talking about capital projects in neighborhoods isn't enough to get something substantial that the volunteer groups want. And so what we're doing is canceling one grant. So we're not asking for new funds. We're simply asking to reallocate existing funding to a higher priority.
Well, I'm not clear. Are you asking for $20,000 a year now?
No, there is currently a Tier 3 grant of $10,000 a year. Our experience over the past several years has been that it has not been used very much, And so what the recommendation before council is to dispense with that Tier 3 grant and move that existing $10,000 allocation to the Festival of Neighborhoods so that they go from $10,000 to $20,000.
It's a Tier 3 grant for this same purpose?
It was for a different purpose. It was to work closely with community partners. Our experience has been that there's only been a couple of times since the Tier 3 was created where we've actually required it.
Do the people out there, did they know about this Tier 3 grant?
It's certainly been part of the community investment strategy.
Incidentally, where was this project? That was another part of my question.
I'm sorry.
Where was this particular $37,000 project?
It was in Monarch Woods Park.
Thank you. I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Gazzola, that project was one that was one in my ward. And because it was a fairly new development and there was a trail going in, what was happening was the neighborhood had chosen the park area adjacent to an incomplete park, and they wanted to expand on that because a trail was going in. They found that the work could be done all together. So it was money that was probably going to be spent anyways, but it happened at the same time as when they put in the playground, and it became a mutually beneficial project to everybody. So just so you understand it. I think that certainly I support Festival of Neighborhoods and all the projects that happen through that organization, but and it's never really. I always thought $10,000 in over the same number of years, it's less and less and less able to do, I think, what initially it wanted to do. So, of course, I'm always advocating, and especially the particular project I just spoke of, that the development industry take a little bit more responsibility, and I think that was my discussion with the people on the site, that had that been taken upon, we probably could have done even more with that $10,000. But we were able to get, the partnering with the operations and the trail that was going on. The only thing that I was a little bit concerned about, and not to take away from the ability to fund Festival of Neighborhoods, is we heard not that long ago a number of community groups where we had this big discussion about, Neruda and the 12 Angry Filmmakers, and where should we get $1,000 and $1,500, and now we're kind of finding out that there was some money in a Tier 3 grant pot that maybe we should have been looking at, either dividing it, adding some to Festival of Neighborhoods, but maybe taking some of that and putting it into that Tier 2. Mr. May, did you want to respond?
So through you, Mr. Chair, staff's position would be that I believe it's over the past 5 years, the Tier 2 grant allocation has increased by about $75,000. The Festival of Neighborhoods grant for the past 20 years has remained unchanged. And so we do believe that this is a priority. It's a program that empowers the Festival of Neighborhoods group to work with volunteers and neighborhoods to identify their needs and identify their priorities. And so it is very unique amongst any of the other programs we have in the municipality.
And I agree completely with you. It gives our grassroots community groups the ability to do something significant in their neighborhoods that helps their entire neighborhood. And it's all about building neighborhoods and building communities. So I don't disagree with you. I just had to make that point. I will be supporting this. I think that Festival of Neighborhoods needs to have a little bit more funding, and I think, who knows, maybe we'll get even more festivals out in our community to try and vie for that money, which would be great.
Just to make a mental note to everyone, this item was budgeted to be 15 minutes, so can everyone please make their comments brief? Mayor Zaire.
Yes. I will support the recommendation, and I just observed on page 12-2 that all of the grants in the last 20 years have gone to just 5 wards in 5 different areas of the city. And as I understand it, the award is totally a random draw, isn't it? Yeah. So it's whoever's drawing it probably should not buy a lottery ticket. It has been you. Well, and I don't know if there's any other way of sort of distributing some of that around the city, but it does take out how would you handle that in terms of it then not being fair with the possible. Well, there were 6 wards for a period of time. You're absolutely right, and I wasn't even thinking that, and so I would have to go back to see what that is. Except that I think what they have actually done here is take it into the current ward systems here, I think, in the allocation of these.
We looked up where the projects took place and then allocated them to the current ward system.
So the fact that there were 6 wards is immaterial. It was just in the area. It was just an observation, and the committee might want to take a look at seeing how there can be a broader distribution of it. Thank you.
I was looking at that myself and noticing that there wasn't anything from Ward 7 in there, so I'm going to have to make some phone calls and yes. Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much. I'll be brief. This has been a point of pride when Mayor Zaire goes around, and he's talked about this a number of times, that this is something unique in our that we do that not other cities do. And I thank you so much to the organizers, Mr. McDonald, and all those that have participated. I've worked with some community groups that have won, and I can tell you it is quite a stretch to try and find purposeful uses for the money within the limits. I am one for living within our means, but having worked with 2 groups recently that have won, I can tell you it's been quite a challenge, and they have gone on to fundraise extensively within their own areas in order to make this meaningful. So I do think it does spur that kind of incentive for them to fundraise additionally, but I do think 20 years is certainly long enough to hold the line. And I think this is a significant increase, but it's a meaningful one that will put the value on this that it deserves.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I didn't get to make my comments earlier. I just quickly want to say that each ward has a greater chance to win the more entries that they have, and that's probably why you end up in the situation that we do. I know Ward 5 isn't the greatest in getting that many entries, hence why we probably don't have any winners, but I was happy that when I represented the previous ward that we had a couple winners at that time. That aside, I know from hearing from staff, or I'm pretty sure from hearing from staff, it costs about $10,000 to install a park bench. For the cost of a park bench for the concrete slab and to actually install is pretty close to $10,000. So if that's what we want everyone to install in their neighborhoods, then we keep this grant, or this money, sorry, not grant, at $10,000. Our community groups are providing so much vitality to our city. We get great bang for our buck, and we give them no funding to do these events for the most part. So no funding. I think it's a great way to increase the vitality of our city, and I think by increasing the amount, it will incent more events to happen because they can really do something meaningful in their community. So I think it's really important, and beside the point that's already been made a couple times, it's been 20 years since we've increased this. And so I think it's really crucial that we not only look at this increase now of $21,000, but also that we come up with some way to continue to increase that, whether it be at the rate of inflation or how we do that, and ask staff to bring that back at a time of convenience. Not urgent, but a big increase now, but how we continue to not fall behind again in the future.
I just want to have staff, if they can make a clarification on $10,000 for a bench, because I think I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, because that sounds awfully a lot, and I would hate to see negative comments come out of that. Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we're going here, but at this point, I'm not going to support wherever it seems to be we're going. 2 weeks, I think it's 2 weeks ago tonight, we were sitting here looking for some more money for some organization, and we had all sorts of fiscally responsible people who talked about, we've already set our budget and now we're changing it, and here we go again. So these things are only okay when you want to do it. Festival of the Neighborhoods is an excellent concept. Mr. McDonald is still here, who was one of the person behind really getting this going, and it's been a tremendous thing. It'd be interesting to know how many functions in our community functions over that 20-year period have taken place, and they're probably not all the functions, but having the Festival of Neighborhoods, it does shine light on things that happen, and I think that is great. So I'm totally in support of that. I have no problem with increasing the amount of money in the future for this program. I do have a concern with the way we just draw a name out of a hat. I would like to see us move in the direction of having different areas of the community put in a proposal that we can review and say, no, this is the best idea, and they deserve to have something, and do it within a range of dollars. We don't have to live with the $10,000. I found it interesting over the past week of reading all of these letters from students as to how they would feel ideas on improving or what an ideal city would be like. I think there are better ways of dealing with this than just a straight draw out of a hat. I don't, and I've always had my concerns over that. I don't have a problem with in the future changing the amount. I think it's a tremendous concept, and it's a great reward for having a lot of activities in your community. But just a straight draw out of the hat, and then now we'll find as much money as you want. So as this recommendation stands, I will not vote in favor of it. And it doesn't mean I'm a naysayer.
I just want to make a few comments myself, and I want to thank staff for doing a terrific job with the Festival of Neighborhoods. It's definitely something that brings a lot of vibrancy and brings a lot of ownership into the community and some pride in our community, and it's definitely in these areas those areas that where residents work hard to get these improvements. It's a fantastic program, and I don't think it's fiscally irresponsible at all. I think it's a long overdue raise in which to include the inflation in over a 20-year time period. So I think it's well overdue, and for a great program. So with that, recorded vote has been called for. All those in favor, please stand. All those opposed? Carried. And that concludes. Oh, we have one more item on the agenda. Councillor Fernandez has for some other business. Go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
This is only going to take a minute. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact I'm wearing pink today for a reason. Wednesday is International Day of Pink to fight against bullying. So if you can remember to wear a pink tie, or in Councillor Galloway Seelock in my closet, I'm sure we have some more pink, and just to be out there and to support the fight against bullying. So that was all I wanted to remind you. This week, Wednesday, April 9th. Yeah. Thank you.
And that concludes. Thank you, everyone.